What's up, everybody? Gubat Banwa 1.4 is out. I'm so excited. I have been doing nothing but posting about this game, trying out the different versions of this game up to the release of 1.4. I had tried basically all the disciplines or classes prior to the release of this game, or this version rather, and then 1.4 came out, and everything changed, but it is for the better, I would say. There are parts of 1.3 that people miss. However, I think the game is so much more streamlined. I think the game is much more intuitive. And I also think that it's just a easier to look through book. There's a lot more help as far as the definitions of things, which is fun and nice. So, without any further ado, let's go through what Gubat Banwa 1.4 is, because I want this stream, this video, to be helpful for people who are new to the system or to people who kind of just want updates after the 1.4 change. What is up, Timmy? Hey. All right, I'm reviewing 1.4. We're doing this thing. I want to make sure the resources are out there. So that we can talk about this game. So, Gubat Banwa is a pre-colonial Southeast Asian TTRPG created by Joaquin Kyle Saavedra, aka Makapatag, or Wax. And also Dil Briones, the art director, has a lot of awesome input on it as well. So this doesn't just go to Timmy, this goes to anyone that might be viewing right now. I will be uploading this to YouTube, but please feel free to use the chat. Please feel free to ask questions. I want to make sure that this is a user-friendly stream for people to get into the game. So immediately, as soon as you open the book, you or the PDF rather, you get hit with this cover. These are 4 of the disciplines that you can play as, locked in heated combat, which is very fun. You have a Warrior Balyan, a Mangangaya, a Blade Weaver, and a Sword Saint, I believe. So, I'd say that this version of Gubat Banwa, the format of the book makes a lot more sense than it did previously, because it's kind of divided into multiple sections. It's like lore, gameplay, disciplines, and then everything else. And I think that makes sense format-wise. And Wax, from what I understand, really wanted this book to be a digested not just as a here's how to play the game, but also here's a welcome to the world, and you can kind of absorb it as a novel. There's a lot of beautiful poetic language, and one of the first things you see when you open up are a number of different passages within the world of Gubat Banwa, within the world of the Sword Isles, this archipelago where the 5 nations or mandalas are in conflict. I'm not going to read through all of them. You should. Once you get the PDF. I think there's still some free downloads remaining at the time I'm making the stream. If you don't have the game yet, and you have the means, support an indie TTRPG, but there are also free downloads. So Gubat Banwa and the philosophy behind it, behind this story, and I'd say something that makes it different from Dungeons & Dragons. Dungeons & Dragons is base game version. Obviously, you can do a lot with it. Very much about like collecting loot, fighting evil, saving the world. And Gubat Banwa really, as a combat TTRPG engine, really focuses a lot on aspects of how you change the world through combat, through violence. In the world of Gubat Banwa, it's not a question of should you or should you not use violence. It's when and how much, which I find very beautiful and also sounds a lot like maybe some martial arts mantras that people might have heard before, because Gubat Banwa takes a lot of inspiration from Filipino martial arts. You do get some very well-written notes from Dil and Wax about what Gubat Banwa is supposed to be, and I definitely recommend giving them a deeper look, because it talks a lot about how their Filipino identities contributed to the book, but also the historical context for it, why pre-colonial Southeast Asia is so important a setting, and, you know, that you don't necessarily have to be a Southeast Asian person to enjoy this game. There's a lot of depth within it, within the combat system, etc. It's just asking to respect the culture and the origins of these traditions, which I think is more than fair. And I do have a Realm Tree song playing in the background. If it's too loud, let me know. I lean towards it being too quiet. However, because this is music written for our audio series, it ebbs and flows. It's not like lo-fi where it's just kind of a nice little background track. This is a soundtrack situation. Um, hopefully it fits the mood. Hopefully it fits the mood. I just kind of don't want it to be silent in the background. All right, so let's get a little bit deeper into the book. One critique of Gubat Banwa 1.3 is that it was a little bit confusing, and I thought it was fun. It was kind of like cracking open a tome of lore and trying to figure out what all of it was telling you about this deep and intricate world. But, keeping in mind that, some people are just here to have fun. Here's a lot more what's it called? A lot more like tutorials, how to use the book, how to create characters. There's a content warnings section because this is a dark fantasy isn't the world. It's a fairly realistic fantasy depiction of pre-colonial Southeast Asia. So class struggle, tremendous violence, complex interpersonal relationships, religion, etc. Different interpretations of gender roles than the West certainly has today, which is very fascinating. A lot of the history, the Southeast Asian history of priestesses who might be in the modern day's term of transgender, I think is very fascinating. In that, like, often it took like a feminine soul to become a spirit medium in pre-colonial Southeast Asia. So that's something that is explored in this game, and I think it's really awesome. It's also explored in Makapatag's book, Princess Murders the Hero, which is a response to the monomyth. We'll get more into all that later. I do want to add a content warning that is not listed here, in that because this is a story about colonialism kind of appearing and racking the land, there's mentions of not just tremendous violence, but also like slavery. The Pale Kings do have mechanics where they summon like unwilling participants to the battle and things like that. So just something to keep in mind. This book as is can get very intense, but I'm always an advocate of shaping your TTRPG experience the way you like. You don't even need to run this as a combat system. God knows how many people use D&D as a roleplay system more than a combat system. You should read this section that I'm scrolling past right now, because it is a beautifully written introduction to the pseudo-colonialism of one of the nations, the Lakanit of Verbanwa, and a Kadunganan, or a player character's response to it. Let me see. I'm kind of wondering if there's like a good part I can read just to get across how good Wok's writing is. I think towards the end of this, there's like a fun little action set piece. But he's written basically a whole book, and it's awesome. And I want to kind of get across the writing style, not just of that novel, Princess Murders the Hero, but also of a lot of the lore flavor text you'll see in Gubat Banwa. So I'll just I'll flex the acting muscles a bit. I'll dramatic reading it. Ha! The Senapati's grin faded. You're not as funny as I thought. He rose, his shadow looming. He raised his saber and said, "Get out." The legions readied their weapons. Odyong frowned. She watched the legions. The Senapati took a few steps forward. "All right, now you really don't amuse me." I said, "Get out." He raised his hand and outstretched his fingers against Odyong. An invisible hammer slammed into the door frame, sending splinters in every direction. Odyong flew backwards and out, landing upon dirt and stone, rolling into the bushes. The legion leapt out then, screaming war cries, firing arrows, rushing with swords and spears at the ready. Odyong had no choice but to flee. She leapt over to a lost hole in the ground, near the hinterlands where the Swiddens became the wilds, and hid there until the legion slowed their search. It took them the whole night. Odyong fell asleep within her hiding grove. So that's some of the flavor text that introduces the game. This being the story of a wandering warrior basically coming into conflict with one of the more colonial civilizations. Something else that's nice about Gubat Banwa 1.4 is that there's a lot of a lot more like not just pronunciation guides but also like definitions for a lot of the words that might pop up in the text. Like right here, Datu slash Timwe are ways to say Lord or Lady. Panglima is a way to say Commander or Lord, etc. Senapati, which is the word that was mentioned before, is like a general. And it really shows how much work they put in because every nation kind of has its own terms. Like, man, I'm trying to remember the ones for Gatu-san in Princess Murders the Hero, but there's ways that they refer to the princess in there, which I think are very fun. All right, let's keep scrolling. Okay, once again, Dill, amazing job, not just creating, but assembling the art for this book, finding all the many artists to put these pieces together, because this is awesome. This book is awesome. I love it so much. Here's the pronunciation, not just pronunciation guide, the definitions for everything. Balyan, you'll hear me mention a lot. I said it before, partly a shaman, partly a priestess, partly a folk healer, partly a sorcerer, but always a spiritual leader. Larger realms always have multiple Balyan fighting over each other. Commonly women, as it's a female role. Folks that take this role are usually considered femme. So that's kind of the thing I was mentioning where gender is so interesting. There's a character in Princess Murders the Hero who is at first a martial weapon fighter, but then kind of reveals that because they studied sorcery, not just sorcery, but also like the feminine magics of the world, they're a little bit gender fluid, fighting both with sword and then channeling their feminine self to use magic. Their pronouns switch around. It's awesome. I really love the world. I love the stories within it. This is probably also a good time to talk about what Gubat Banwa means. Keep in mind, I'm a diaspora Filipino. I speak English. I speak significantly more Japanese than I do Spanish or Bisaya or Tagalog. But Gubat Banwa, from my understanding, can mean warring lands or place of jungles, depending on whether you're interpreting it in Tagalog or Bisaya. But if anyone wants to correct me on that, feel free. I remember seeing that in the book. And I think warring lands really describes the game very well. Definitions. Kadunganan is a word that I'm going to say a lot, so I'll say it again. Kadunganan are your player characters. I like to think of them as the warriors who are going to move the world to their will. They are the ones that are strong enough to change the politics of the Sword Isles, to protect the people within the Sword Isles, and just take in the really awesome art in the meantime. Speaking of Kadunganan, here's a little bit of text describing what their role is in the world. You are Kadunganan, but that's nothing special. The gods of the trees and the mountains have seen more of your kind than you have seen blades of grass. They grant you power, sure, through your incantations, and you harness ancient blasphemies with your sorcery. But that is nothing to them. What does make them interested is the fact that your footfalls herald the end. The festival of the longest night arrives, of the Adawa year 1001. The time of violence is now. Decide the fate of the next world. Even the gods and the spirits shall revel in this festival. There is no more time for hesitation. Gubat Banwa comes to fulfill its name. Where will you be at the end of the world? Choose your conviction, Kadunganan, and light your flame of want. Guided by rumination, you must change the world. Death, harmony, power, hegemony, empire, wealth, annihilation. Become God King to change Gubat Banwa's destiny, or tear all God Kings down and create something different. Unsheath your sword, and then raise it. Do not forget to cut. The sword is used for cutting. Violence until glory. That is kind of one of the mantras associated with Gubat Banwa. Violence until glory. You are moving the world with your combat prowess. Even to the point where your basic attacks are called inflict violences. And again, please stop me if I am doing too many things where I'm assuming you already know what I'm talking about. Because I've been playing the game a lot, but I want this to be accessible for everybody. Hello, Betty's Dungeon Adventure. We are reviewing Gubat Banwa right now. Still getting into the basics of it, the world of this pre-colonial Southeast Asian game. Excuse me. Now it's defining what Gubat Banwa is through all of this. A game of playing as larger-than-life warriors known as the Kadunganan. Very often there will be a guardian spirit known as the Umalagad who will guide Kadunganan through the world. That would be your game master, your storyteller, your archivist, world builder, etc., whatever word you want to use. The person running the game is the Umalagad, which is a word meaning guardian spirit. That is what I am in the anthology streams that we'll be resuming in the next few weeks. The person kind of running the game, but one of my favorite parts of Gubat Banwa, it is very supported for you to be able to play solo. You can play this game by yourself. Something that I never knew I needed when it came to combat-centric tabletop games, excuse me. I know there's a lot of wonderful journaling TTRPGs out there, but I would always be building D&D 5e characters in my head and being like, I want to try out these builds, but who knows the next time I'm going to be in a campaign, because it feels like I'm always running the game. Gubat Banwa has you covered, because there are robust ways to support solo play. There's ways to roll for what enemies do. There are ways to see what happens in the plot. You can kind of roll to see what your mission is. And there's a pre-written adventure at the end of this, which we will give a little glance at. There's a lot of different stories you can tell with Gubat Banwa. I love my fantasy epics, so that's what I'm going to be doing. All right. Again, all of this stuff is good to read. It's good for you to know how to play the game. I hope my rambling is getting across at least a fraction of all of this. Okay, we are getting to something fun and important, which is dice. In Gubat Banwa, primarily, rather than doing a lot of math and adding a bunch of modifiers like D&D, it's like, oh, you roll hit, but your proficiency bonus is +3, and your dex is +5, so you're going to have +8 to hit with your longbow. Gubat Banwa is not so much about that math, and much more about rolling big handfuls of dice. It's very satisfying. For example, if you're attacking with your bravery stat, and it's a 5, that 5 is not how much you add to your bravery roll. You're going to be rolling 5 dice. You're going to be rolling 5d10 to attack with bravery in that case. And you are looking for 6 and above, basically. And that's really the core of Gubat Banwa, rolling big handfuls of dice. D10s on the offense when you're trying to do something, and then D8s when you're trying to defend against something. And both times you're looking for 6 and up. You, let's say as the attacker, will roll your 5d10s, you'll count up all of the ones that are 6 and higher. That will be the amount of hits you land on the enemy until the enemy rolls their defend die. They'll roll their d8s, they'll count up how many 6 and highers they got, and they will block an equivalent amount of hits. Let's say you got 4 hits on your 5d10, and they got 3 parries, 3 successes on their defend die, then you would hit them 2 times, because 5 hits minus 3 parries, 2 hits, basically. And then status effects, etc. will factor in. But that's combat. We'll get to combat. That's also how roleplay works. You're going to have roleplay stats, which we will go over shortly, and the Umalagad, or yourself, if you are playing solo, will roll the systems defend die against you. They'll roll a number of d8s equal to how difficult it is. If you're doing something risky, you're rolling 2d8 versus the d10s you're rolling. If you're doing something difficult, 4d8, formidable 6d8, impossible 8d8, etc. And hits cancel out misses, and then you see which one comes out on top. So after that, if you're, let's say, trying to convince a town guard to let you into the town at night to investigate something, you'll roll those d10s versus however many d8s the Umalagad terms is risky for it. And if you get 0 hits, that's a partial success. You get what you want, but then you kind of choose something that's not so great that happens. Maybe takes extra time, maybe you suffer something like HP loss of resources, loss of money, etc. 1+ hits is a full success. You get what you wanted completely for now, and that's it. It was a little bit more complicated in 1.3, and I'm much more favorable this way around, because in 1.3, it felt like it was very challenging to make even simple rolls sometimes, because the amount of difficulty dice felt a little bit higher. 0 hits being a partial success, as opposed to like 1 to 2, which was the partial success in 1.3, makes things very nice. That being said, if there are more difficulties than hits, that action is a failure. You suffer consequences. As established in the fiction, things become more dramatic. And the cool thing about this game, this version, if you're stuck on consequences, that's all in the book. There's a section in the book talking about the things that could possibly go wrong. There are some modifiers that you can use. I know I just said this game is mostly about handfuls of dice, but if you ever come across a situation where it feels like it would just be anticlimactic for a character of your training to completely beef the roll, like the old adage of like a thief should be able to climb a ladder, like maybe they might not even need to roll for that. You do have permission to potentially just add a number or two to it, which is fine, or add an extra die, etc. Or if someone's assisting you, that's another way to get a little bit of extra help. Here we go. Here are the roleplay stats in something that is very different from 1.3. In Gubat Banwa 1.3, you had 5 roleplay stats, and they corresponded to the classical elements: fire, water, earth, air, and then metal as well, which is a classical element in the Eastern Hemisphere, basically. It was an interesting system. It was really cool. There were elemental weaknesses that every character had, depending on which elements they communed with. But everything kind of matched up one-to-one with D&D's stats, which I wasn't the craziest about. Like, it made it simple, but it also didn't have Gubat Banwa stand out as much as it could. Like, basically fire was strength, basically air was dex, etc. Also, what the hell is up, Mika? I am just going over the roleplay aspects of Gubat Banwa. I've already talked about how Gubat Banwa is less about modifiers, like rolling a die and then adding numbers to it, and more about just rolling big fistfuls of dice and counting up how many successes you have. Thank you so much for shouting out Roll D5 to me. So, these are your roleplay stats, basically. Your roleplay stats are still associated with the elements, but they are much more interesting than just air is roughly dex, metal is roughly intelligence, etc. And I will go through these. I will actually go through these and not just skim over them, because I think it's important. It is a difference between 1.3, and it is also very nice for the fiction. So, consort is the action of light. Your character will have a stat representing the light within themselves. When you consort, you perform rituals, meditate, speak with gods and spirits. Roll this when dealing with spirits or mysteries. Are you investigating a burial site to try and figure out what's going on? You would have somebody roll consort, which is based off of their light stat. Destroy is the action of lightning. When you destroy, you seize and bleach it away. You can be precise with your destruction, or you can be wanton. Roll this when breaking something or forcing yourself through something. That's pretty straightforward. I think there is also fun, because these are kind of vague, in, like, leaving a little bit up to interpretation. Like, if one of my players argued, if they had a high lightning stat, and they wanted to argue that, like, maybe emotionally berating a guard until they let them into the town was destroying them, an act of lightning bullying, I would allow it, That's kind of why I like that it's not just as simple as intelligence is how smart you are. Wisdom is how smart you are when it comes to dealing with people in the world around you. It's like, no. Consort is the action of light is spirits and mysteries. Destroy, the action of lightning, is when breaking something or forcing yourself through something. Like, it's a little bit more vague, and I think there's a little bit more interpretation that you can have there. Express, the action of fire. When you express, you sing, dance, perform, or speak with firebrand's ardor. Roll this when you perform arts or express your passions. Also different from 1.3. Fire it felt a little bit closer to strength. In my experience with 1.3. Glide is the action of air. When you glide, you move any part of yourself with unprecedented grace, swiftly and nimbly. Roll this when you move nimbly, quietly, or quickly. So it does kind of line up to dex, but depending on what you're doing, you can maybe argue it to be like other stats as well. You want to make sure you can keep track of what your Kadunganan is good at. Also check out Roll D5. Me, Mika, Timmy, etc. all play on it. It's a good channel. It's where we do indie TTRPGs. That is how I discovered Gubat Banwa when we wanted to do a charity stream for AAPI month, and I'm so glad that I did. What's wrong with my shirt? Come on. Good. There. Well, that's better. Observe the action of dark. Yes, your character can have a dark stat, which is very fun. When you observe, you reach into the darknesses and glean true knowledge from it. Roll this when you look for truths from someone or something, or search lores. So that's a little bit of your occult knowledge, basically, to use modern terms. Reason, the action of water. When you reason, you use your knowledges, memory, and sagacity. Good word. Good word. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. To come to correct conclusions. Roll this when you see if you know something, remember something, or can make truth out of evidence. I feel like I would be rolling water a lot in some campaigns to try and figure out the mysteries. Rule is the action of metal. Metal previously was kind of like intelligence. Now it's different. When you rule, you see something and forcibly move it into the position you want to be in, even if it's yourself. Roll this when you have to temper yourself or manipulate something else, which I think lines up very well. Metal and lightning were kind of the same thing in 1.3. Now, lightning is much more like a force of natural destruction, and metal feels more like the using of tools, which I think is fun. And finally, speak, the action of earth. When you speak, act with the touch of a caregiver, communicating with silver tongue and gold lips. Roll this when speaking or persuading someone or trying to understand your fellow folk. That does kind of line up to charisma, but that's the thing that I was mentioning where I kind of like that these are a little bit vague. Could you perhaps argue that depending on how you're speaking to the person, maybe you roll fire instead of earth? After all, express is the action of fire. Yes, your earth action is when you're persuading someone, but rolling fire when you're performing arts or expressing your passions, maybe you think it is so important for you to go on stage at this like great village performance. Maybe you could make an argument for that being fire instead of earth, for example. Another bit of layer to roleplay is your facets. So these were in 1.3 your crown alignment, your mask alignment, and your sword alignment. These are, I kind of look at them and I think about like astrology a little bit, like sun sign, moon sign, rising sign. These are basically ways to add further depth to your character. Every character is going to have a wrathful facet, a gentle facet, and a royal facet. Your wrathful facet is your demeanor, how you act when dealing with other people. Your gentle facet is your shadow. This is your deep, repressed desires. This is what you want, but you don't know if you can have it. Let's see. Your royal facet, meanwhile, is your nature. This is you, who you really are, the mask and the wand together. You can kind of see why I have astrological associations, which I think is fun. Yeah, big three, right? So for example, we haven't done any rolling yet. This is a TTRPG stream, right? Let's roll. Let's create a hypothetical Kadunganan right now, and let's decide let's roll to see what they're like. Fun little orange die, gift from my dear friend Addie, who I played with on stream. So their wrathful facet is Earth. Caring, nourishing, absolutely friendly, the heart of the party, willing to take everyone in. Remember that the soil crumbles, though, so that means they deal with people with an earth side to it all. They're a Libra. They're a Libra rising. When dealing with people, they're probably very balanced, to use astrological terms again. I'm a Libra rising. I know that. Let's roll for their gentle facet, their shadow, their deep repressed desire. I rolled a 4. Let's say that's air. Their repressed desire is graceful, witty, and free. Air breathes life into others, but keep in mind that air can dissipate, pulled in every direction. So maybe that's a part of themselves that they keep a little bit more under the surface, that they are a bit of a free spirit, maybe a conflict avoider. I think that actually, we're kind of already getting a character right here. Somebody who kind of tries to talk their way out of situations because at their core, underneath it all, they're kind of a conflict avoider. Libra Moon, also, I guess. And then Royal Facet, your nature. This is you, who you really are, the mask and the wand together. I rolled a 1. Fire! Passionate, expressive, brimming with energy, can sometimes forget their flames burn. This seems like a real Manic Pixie Dream Girl of a character. And you know what? We love it. Boom. We've created a Kadunganan in the roleplay sense. Amazing. All right. So here's just a little bit more information about how to go through the game, how to play the game, how to run it solo, etc. Look to the Umalagad, the person who is going to be running the game. Here's a fun change from 1.3. Thunderbolts. They were present in 1.3, but they have changed. Thunderbolts are kind of your comeback mechanic in Gubat Banwa. Thunderbolts are something that you can accumulate through the fiction by doing awesome things. They can be given out by the Umalagad. They can be given out by yourself if you're playing solo, if your Kadunganan is like following their roleplay, following their convictions and passions. They're your comeback mechanic. You can accumulate them over the course of the game. You start with one, and you can spend that one Thunderbolt to gain a hit or a parry when you're attacking or defending. Sure, that was the case with Thunderbolts in 1.3. They added a little bit of complexity to it, to the point where you can spend multiple Thunderbolts at once, not just to apply multiple hits. You could spend a Thunderbolt to re-roll any roll. That's cool. You know, you could use them to hit, you could use them to re-roll. That's all awesome. That's fun and good. You could spend 2 Thunderbolts simultaneously to introduce a new object, terrain change, or change the weather. If you are doing enough awesome stuff in combat, or alternately you completely miss an attack and therefore gain a Thunderbolt token, you can call upon the forces of nature to change the world around you, to change the elements, to create a lightning storm, which is an actual weather effect that can affect the battlefield. So you are affecting the world not just with dice rolls, but also with this accumulated resource representing the badassery and the desperation of your character. Or, here's the crazy one, you can spend 3 Thunderbolt tokens during your turn, or riff, in violence or combat to gain +1 beat, or action. Okay, let me go through the more conventional definitions. You can spend 3 Thunderbolt tokens on your turn in combat to gain an action. If you have 6 Thunderbolt tokens, and you really need this enemy dead, you can expend them and give yourself 2 extra actions. That's wild. You can only gain up to 5, so, you know, your player can't just stockpile them and then wait till they get to the big Diwata at the end that they need to kill and then give themselves 10 turns in a row. You can only gain up to 5 actions. But Thunderbolts are not just math anymore. They're not just, oh, I deal an extra hit, oh, I guard an extra time. You can change the weather and you can give yourself extra actions. That's wild. Huge change from 1.3. It is so cool. It is so cool. Little differences between solo and co-op play. It says it's probably good to have a journal if you're doing solo play. I will probably stream solo play a little bit more often, so that'll be the way that I log it. Little bit of guidance for how you can play solo, surrendering yourself to the fiction, revel in the dramatic, don't worry too much about winning, etc. Let's see. Moons. Moons is a nice little system, kind of inspired by Blades in the Darks, I believe. Because, you know, one thing that's kind of hard about playing a TTRPG solo is knowing when things are supposed to happen. Like, it's kind of your judgment call, like, how much time you spend in the town before you go fight the boss, basically. Yes, you can solo play this game, Mika. So, basically, to use D&D 5e as an example just because it's so universal, imagine D&D 5e, except you can roll for what the owlbear is going to do when you're fighting it. It can move, attack, move, or maybe it can attack, defend, etc. You can play this game totally by yourself because you can roll for what enemies do. And as far as roleplay goes, that's where moons come in. Moons are your tool to gauge accumulated progress to a certain fictional happening. Here's a good example. Let's scroll down a little bit. There are raiders outside of your village that are planning on raiding it. You want to face this problem, so you mark out an 8 crescent moon. That means that whenever you fail a catch or consequence, you fill in a crescent representing the imminent danger of the raiders. So you can kind of just run around doing stuff until your moons run out. You can kind of think as like of moons as like HP for the roleplay section, and when you do stuff wrong or just kind of like spend a lot of time doing a thing, you can mark off a crescent. Maybe you have like, you can think of it as like the number of events you have until the next combat. If you are preparing for a big battle the next day, maybe you give yourself a 4 crescent moon, so you kind of draw a circle, draw a little plus sign in it so that there's 4 quadrants. You spend your first action of the day hunting for food, color in 1 crescent. You spend the other one scouting for the enemy, get some information, color in that other crescent, etc. And once the crescents are all filled in, boom, combat starts. So that's a way that you, as a solo player, can go through the roleplay sections by yourself. You can kind of give yourself a number of actions you can do. And when you're in a town, there are set actions like hunting for food, holding a feast, meeting NPCs that you can roll for to see what happens. Maybe you get some bonus items. Maybe you completely fail at something, etc. There is a system of honor and debt within the fiction of Gubat Banwa, which is another role-playing system. See, we've already been talking about this game for like a half hour, and we're still going over the roleplay stuff, which I think is very exciting. Like, I do love loose roleplay mechanics as a, improviser of like 15 years. But there are tools to try and make sure that there are things that support the fiction, that you can do this by yourself, that you're not just totally lost when running this game for people and you don't know what to do. It's all in there. Honor and debt are kind of how your character is viewed and who they owe, which does have roleplay consequences. As a Kadunganon, you begin with 5 honor. That's kind of how the world perceives you. Honor is expected to fluctuate very frequently, and it will kind of affect how the world sees you. Honor is a resource. You can spend honor to try and convince people to do things for you. Let's again look at the case of a town guard not letting you into the town to investigate it at night. Well, maybe you can spend, let's say it's moderately difficult, 1 plus 1d4 honor on that. Let's go ahead and roll. This Kadunganon is spending 2 honor in order to convince the guard so that they don't even have to make a roll. Honor is a resource that you can accumulate and spend, which is very, very fun and cool. Yeah, honor is one of the best things about this game. It really is such a fun roleplay mechanic that doesn't, I think, overload it all. You are going to gain honor by, like, accomplishing victories in violence, doing an optional objective, etc. But you can also lose honor. You can lose honor when you break a combat, kill someone meritorious, if you accidentally fireball a village elder or something, if you're defeated, etc. So, another thing about Gubat Banwa that I want to mention, just because you run out of HP, just because you get a lot of wounds, defeat does not necessarily mean death. Sometimes for the storytelling, it's a little bit more interesting, maybe for your character to, maybe they fail their objective. Maybe they are defeated and they have to go into hiding while your villain wins for a few years until they can rally the forces to give it another try again. All right. Bartering is another system of Gubat Banwa because pre-colonial Southeast Asia, maybe not using money the way that we expect to today. You can use honor to haggle for things. It allows you to get some fun little items, which are all listed here, which is great. So here's something good to take into account. Generally, there's no standard currency in the Sword Isles. Common items such as foodstuffs, salt, deerskin, and the like are simply bartered. So, you can use honor to get food for the night. Maybe you can do a task to get food for the night. It's all supported by roleplay, and I think that just creates such an interesting fantasy world where you're not just dropping 5 gold to put your party up at the inn for the night. You're like, okay, can we stay the night if we help you till the fields? Can we stay the night if we, get this Virbanwan scout to leave your village alone? You have to get a little bit more creative when you're not necessarily just spending money on things. Though that being said, things are roughly accounted for in terms of their value by, like, their weight here. So there's, like, a really awesome list of things here that you can, like, barter for: a bamboo fishing rod, a clay pot of dye, etc. All things that you can use in roleplay. This is all here. This is all stuff that you can mess around with. Again, I'm a very improvisational role player, so I don't know how often I'm going to be digging into this stuff, but I'm very excited to explore it a little bit more often. Let's see. Okay, debt. Almost scrolled past it. I should not. Debt is very important in the world of Gubat Banwa. Also, very important in the Philippines, even in the modern day. When you owe someone, you gotta hold yourself to that. Otherwise, it's a real dick move. Debt in Gubat Banwa is a social value and mechanic to show how much leverage you have over someone or how much leverage someone has on you. You usually gain debt to someone when they do something for you, such as give you an item, grant you protection, food, or even interact with you romantically. So, returning to the example of an innkeeper, maybe the innkeeper lets you stay the night, but then you're indebted to them. And then the next day, you wake up and they're like, hey, there's a beast terrorizing my farmhouse. Can you deal with that? You owe me. You are in debt to me. And you better do that, or else there's going to be consequences. Debt is taken very seriously. A Kadunganan cannot have more debt to a single entity than their legend. +2. Otherwise, bad stuff happens. If you run out of honor, if you accrue too much debt, then it all starts to have consequences. If a Kadunganan ever gains more debt to another than their debt limit, they do not gain debt anymore and lose 1 honor instead. If you're ever tired of problem players in your games who are just running off, like murdering NPCs, and that's not really the game you wanted to tell, there's actually a mechanic for punishing them, and that kind of goes back to honor. If your character, if their honor dips too low, they basically become a villain, and you lose control of the character. Which sometimes I feel like is a shortcut to a lot of what goes down in D&D campaigns. I was in a campaign where I had somebody who was a real murder hobo, classical, like just kind of like murdering things, getting all the loot, and then because it was a very chaotic campaign, we were all kind of like, fuck it. And then our other characters like literally killed him because he was killing people and messing with everything. So in Gubat Banwa, if that same situation happened, once he was violating all these social laws, maybe instead his honor would just dip to 0 and he would become an NPC. He would become a villain and leave, and then that player had better come up with a new character. Yes, I agree, Mika. I do think Andrew would have a lot of fun with this system. Let's see. I'm very grateful to have people who are even more familiar with Gubat Banwa than I am, because I've been pretty immersed in it, but it's been a few months as opposed to many others. Not even a few months. 2 months? Yeah, that sounds about right. It encourages you to interact with NPCs more for those players who are reluctant to just walk up to folks and be like, what's your deal? What's this town's deal? Yeah, you can get creative with trading and bartering for sure. You can get a village indebted to you, and there's an actual mechanic for it. And there's a lot more mechanics. You can transfer debt to somebody, etc. But that's basically just a little overview of it. I want to get to combat tonight. I'm only a 10th of the way through the book, though a lot of it is like a bestiary and things like that. This is a long book. It's a long book, but it basically also includes like the monster manual of Gubat Banwa. Convictions, complications, and passions are all other roleplay facets. You're going to give your character a conviction, you're going to give them a complication, you're going to give them a passion, therefore making them not a blank slate. The conviction being why they fight. They're like long-term goal in the world of the Sword Isles. Their complications are something that Kadunganan will always react to and act in accordance to. Let me... Before I, like, over-explain myself into a corner, let me make sure that I'm actually, like, on the right track with this. The one they hate attends the feast. They will do everything they can to avoid them to the detriment of their own plans. There you go. Their complication, maybe they really hate Datu. They really hate, like, the leaders of the Sword Isles, and they will avoid them at all costs. That's a way to make sure that your Kadunganan always acts in character for the roleplay sections, basically. And their passions are their immediate wants and needs, while the convictions are long-term, their passions are kind of their short-term ones. To change your passion, roll a rule. Oh, interesting. That's a rule. Is that the action of metal? On a partial success or less, you must change that passion. Fun. Amazing. Sometimes when playing with an Umalagad, they may invoke your conviction, telling a Kadunganan if they would like to act in a certain way. This is a common way for the Umalagad to give an opportunity to the Kadunganan for drama. They will always be rewarded with thunderbolts, or almost always be rewarded with thunderbolts. So there you go. I kind of touched on it before, but the person running the game might reward you for for acting in character, basically, which is, again, more motivation to act in character. All right, we're starting to get to the combat, which is the part that I could really just talk about for days. So, adventuring! The privilege of the Kadunganan is that they can adventure. They are the highest rung of the warrior class. Like a lot of TTRPGs, there are points of light or just like safe places. These are towns, etc. Meanwhile, like, there is danger. There is repose, which is time to catch your breath. You can heal all HP, which is something that I like. Repose is like 10 minutes of resting, as opposed to like D&D's like you need to take a short rest to recover any HP naturally. That's an hour. You know, all that stuff built for the long dungeon crawl, which I don't think is necessarily conducive to the fast and furious fiction, that Gubat Banwa is trying to provide. I am kind of scrolling through a lot because I do want to get through the combat, and you should check out this book for yourself. It is very possible that there are still free downloads. There were 64 this afternoon, 64 free downloads remaining. And the game itself is only $20 if you want to support an incredible indie TTRPG combat system. Combat system, also a roleplay system, as we have been going through. Every adventure has at least one objective. Every combat will have one objective. It can have multiple, etc. And don't think in the binaries of triumph and failure. Again, just because your character is defeated by the big bad and they weren't supposed to be, you know, that doesn't necessarily mean they die. The big bad can leave them alive and then conquer the Sword Isles for 2 years. And then your character comes back wizened and scarred and ready to have another go at it. Here we go. Here are mechanics to travel, which I think is really nice. Like, let's say that you're on a ship, you're traveling across the Sea of Violence, maybe the water, maybe literally just on a journey that is not safe. If you're not going too far, you can create a 4 crescent moon. 4 things are going to happen before your next combat encounter. Middle shore is 6 crescent moon, etc. So you can determine that even in solo play. If you're traveling across the country, give yourself an 8 crescent moon. You roughly have 8 things to do until you get there, and some of them might be combat encounters. All right, didn't want to skip over this section. Your legend grows. This is kind of your leveling up. When you return from an adventure, no matter the outcome, your legend grows. Reach the next legend. A Legend 1 warrior becomes Legend 2. You gain all of the following. Gain +1 to your actions. Your actions and your prowesses are things that increase. So your actions are those 8 elements, your consort, your express, etc. Your prowesses are kind of your combat stats. You gain +1 honor. So honor does accumulate quite easily in this game, which makes it a resource that you can spend. And then you gain 2 signature techniques from any discipline of your choice that you can feasibly learn in the fiction. If you're going from Legend 0 or level 0 to 1, one of the techniques should be from your current discipline. You can also change your action points around, change your prowesses around, replace one technique with another, as long as it makes sense. That's a lot. Basically, you increase your stats, your roleplay stats, and your combat stats, you gain honor, and you learn more martial arts techniques. Martial arts, in Gubat Banwa, not just being punching and kicking, but all sorts of acts of violence. You might also notice, no way to increase HP. HP is not a stat. HP is fixed by your class or discipline, though there are items that can increase your max HP. Really helps the game be fast and furious when you're Legend 5 and you have 6 HP as a witch. It all works out. It all works out mathematically. You can roll to see where you are going to have your combat. Let's take our hypothetical Kadunganan again, our problem avoider, Manic Pixie Dream Girl. Where's she going? She is, it's her job to raid heaven or hell. She must use a sky barge into the depths of Earth or the heights of the sky. That's her mission. I hope she does well. And again, this is another thing for solo play. You don't know where exactly these bandits have taken up residence, and you need to oust them from their stronghold. You can roll a die to see where. No idea how these bandits ended up in heaven or hell. You can roll for your objective. Again, this is all super duper supported by the solo play. Downtime is a big section, because this is kind of the time that your moons are roughly filling out. Bayonetta! So true. Downtime is the times of respite. You enter downtime, you're out of combat, you can heal 1 wound, which we will get to. Wounds are kind of like death saving throws, approximately. Again, I'm just using 5e because it's relatively universal in the TTRPG space. And you can do 2 downtime actions. You don't need to use them all up, because some of them do have risks. But here is another incredible part of the roleplay mechanics. You're playing by yourself, you don't know what you're going to do in a town. Well, guess what? You can do things like hunt, you can feast, and there are all mechanics for it. Let's look at hunt, because it's pretty simple. Whether with the Datu or not, you can go hunting for food and game. This is usually for ritual sacrifices and items for a feast. Make an appropriate roll as to where you're hunting or fishing, with an appropriate difficulty depending on what you're trying to hunt. Each kadunganan on the hunt can roll. If you get a full success, which is a 1 or higher on your roll, or 1 success or higher, you gain 2 raw meat. Partial success, you find meat, but you lose something, an item, your passion, your conviction, you change it. You've been really traumatized hunting that boar. Someone's dead to you, something important to you. Failure, you attract unwanted attention, either the spirits of the forest or the wrath of the gods. I think that's really fun. You accidentally stumble into Princess Mononoke because you decide to hunt and you don't roll well. Again, this is all stuff that can just pop up in the fiction. This, even if you're playing solo, is a lot of fun inspiration. You attract unwanted attention, you hunt badly, maybe an Unglu, a terrifying forest spirit, comes after you at night. You know, this is all stuff that you can fuel, even when you're playing solo. You can be fueled by when you're playing solo. You can visit a market, you can mingle, you can switch disciplines, etc. Oh, that's beautiful. Art, I don't know if that was in the previous edition. I like it. I really like it. It's different from the other art styles that we've been seeing before. Consumables! Consumables are a little bit more in-depth now than they were, and kind of equate a little bit more to this current edition of Gubat Banwa. Let's see. Yeah, it is really cute. It is adorable. It's... I don't know if I'd call it... My brain is saying Ghibli-esque. I know it's not necessarily, but I think it's just like the shit-eating grin of that character that makes me see them as like a fun little protagonist. All right, so these are some of the consumable items. What is really awesome about this, something I'm very grateful for compared to a lot of other TTRPGs, it doesn't necessarily list the price, but where you might find these things. For example, a Firebird Pearl, which makes you immune to flames for 10 minutes, or for a resound, a turn in violence, you can find it in deep volcanoes. That is really nice as the person running the game, if you're kind of like trying to figure out what items people might find, rather than just like rolling on a magic item table or something like that, which theoretically you could still do. Let's see, you are maybe like hanging out in a village of apothecaries. Guess what? They're probably going to give you an antidote, which cleanses poison on yourself or an adjacent ally. Some of these items are also wild. Like the bolt fruit, your next attack shocks. And it's often found in the Graveyard of the Winds or far south Rusunuga, excuse me. So you can give yourself positive status effects with these. We'll go over more of that in the combat section, but first, one of the most important parts of Gubat Banwa, why I love the world so much, these are the mandalas, the nations of Gubat Banwa. Now, again, another thing that does kind of like get to me about a lot of high fantasy TTRPGs is it's really hard to keep track of like, oh, you know, we're on the Sword Coast right now, Neverwinter's over there, like just getting really lost on the world map of it all. Gubat Banwa, because the world, the Sword Isles, are an archipelago, you don't necessarily need to worry about when you're moving, like, oh, that way is this person's territory, that way is this person's territory, because these five nations are all kind of warring for everything. There can be a Virbanwan encampment in Gatusan, for example. Um, well, that might make a little bit more sense once I actually explain what the five nations are. That being, borders are not so strictly defined in Gubat Banwa. There's territory that can be controlled, but you don't necessarily have to worry too much about the specifics of it. Let's just go through the nations. The Rajanate of Gatusan. This is a fan favorite for sure. Its flag being a mythological serpent. I forget its name. It's a really cool one, though, from Filipino mythos. You can kind of think of Gatusan as the most freewheeling kingdom. Yes, Bakunawa. That was it, Bakunawa. Suladnan Bakunawa. Naga, not quite it. No, this is a sea serpent. This is a huge, terrifying sea monster called the Bakunawa. So, Gatusan is a bit of a maritime civilization and also, like, open fields, freewheeling. It is ruled by a Rajanate, the great Ponong Rajabatara Ambasi, ancestor of the Tiger Lord Srivishaya, who was once an Araskan prince in the southeast. Gatusan is raiders. It is very free-spirited people, tattooed, often to represent their love, their combat history, etc. Gatusan tends to be a fan favorite because they seem to be the happiest nation. And they also have a really cool tiger person that rules them. So, we love that. Apum Bukid! Timmy, this is your nation. So we have Gatusan being kind of like the freewheeling raiders, treasure hunters, etc. Or as much as treasure exists in the Sword Isles, kind of glory seekers, I should say. Apum Bukid is very much the opposite of a lot of these other nations. Their civilization is at the center of the world, at the pillar to heaven, basically. This grand mountain, and they are protecting it. They are less of a colonialist nation and much more of a traditionalist, protect the pillar, honor the spirits, and they are inspired by indigenous peoples of the Philippines. They have like traditions of like demon hunters, head takers, etc. All really exciting stuff. They're a confederation of 5 principalities, so they do not have one person running it all. They have multiple people all ruling it, kind of like a council. They mostly do fights in Apu's territory. However, that being said, they are pretty notorious demon hunters when they need to. Apunon and Kamuton warriors are notorious for their pacifism. Despite owning a large trove of martial culture and knowledge, they never use their peerless art for sheer violence to avoid creating more atrocity. Through atrocity arises uncontrollable dark, which eats away at every other essential thing. This is the sword that defends, not the sword that attacks, which I think is very fun. So boom, we have 2 nations. We have our freewheeling sea raiders, and we have our traditionalist defensive territory. The Sultanate of Akai is kind of the first of our more colonialist nations. They're very much like a theocracy. They want to unite everybody under their religion to the moon goddess. They have a number of kingdoms under them, each one led by a Panglima or a Ratu/Datu. They are expanding their power in the name of divine striving. Akai, being a very religious place, tends to reward spirituality through combat. If you are a good warrior for Akai, you will find favor with the moon goddess. They believe that the moon has angels and devils in a palace on it. And Akai is all about getting up to the moon. Whether it's through literal means or spiritual means, Akai really loves the moon. And one of my favorite bits of conflict between the nations in Gubat Banwa is, that like divine mountainous pillar situation that Apum Bukid is protecting. They're protecting Mount Apu from demons. They're also kind of protecting it from places like Akai. Akai's like, you're the center of the world? I bet your mountain is a ladder to the moon. What if we took it from you? What if we climbed all the way up and reunited with our moon goddess? So Gubat Banwa is very much a world where the interlocking conflicts of its 5 mandalas, its 5 nations, are often motivation for conflict in and of themselves. Apum Bukid wants to protect the mountain. Akai wants to use the mountain to climb to the moon. You know, rough for sure. Speaking of rough, the Lakanit of Virbanwa, one of the most fascinating of the mandalas. This is a nation that was conquered by colonialism, but then they learned from it and tried to colonize the rest of the world after they were able to fight off their oppressors. It is inspired by post-colonial Philippines, post-colonial Manila. A lot of that influence of fantasy Catholicism has snuck in there. They will burn you with sacred fire and ash, and they will not apologize. Their ruler is Pinaka Lakan Huan Rekno, great-grandson of the late Lakan Dula. We will go over him more, because his description is wild. His description is absolutely wild. They worship a many-headed, giant Catholic-looking statue called Makagahum, who's really scary. This is a really scary colonialist nation. But there's, always layers within it, They did still fight off colonialism. The Pale Kings were the biggest, most notorious colonists of the Sword Isles, these fae-like vampiric beings. And, you could easily run a Virbanwa campaign where you're fighting the Pale Kings again. So, there's always moral grayness, though this game is very, very clear about its stance on colonialism, which is colonialism bad. Pretty straightforward, and I'm here for it. The Kingdom of Bai. I am intrigued by Bai. It's kind of inspired by more mainland Southeast Asia. It is the oldest civilization and also the most advanced. Their disciplines include people who play sports and people who command giant robots. Giant statue robots called god bodies. It's really cool. Bai is really cool. I want to spend more time with Bai because I really love all their disciplines. They're all really fun and complex. So that's a little overview of the mandalas. Very nice that there's also inspiration for Gubat Banwa listed here if you want to pick up on the vibes. Princess Mononoke, definitely Gubat Banwa vibes. A story about environmentalism and wrathful spirits and colonialism, technology, etc. And Ruby by Monty Ohm. I love Ruby. I really do. It meant a lot to me as a teenager. Have not kept up with it, but that style of combat, that high-flying action is actually pretty reminiscent of what Gubat Banwa tries to achieve. Gubat Banwa is not just a game about running up to things and hitting them. It is a game about knocking people into the air, slamming them back down, dodging backwards. Those are your turns. Those are your 3 action turns. Also, Final Fantasy Tactics, huge inspiration for Gubat Banwa. Wax, I believe, is a huge fan of it, and understandably so. It's an incredible game, Final Fantasy Tactics and Final Fantasy Tactics War of the Lions. I was a little baby, and I started with Final Fantasy Tactics A2, Grimoire of the Rift, which is Final Fantasy Tactics for babies a little bit. But I'm a huge Fire Emblem player, so I'll finish War of the Lions eventually. My PSP broke. I was more than halfway through it. I was fighting someone on a roof. What can you do? All right, here's a little bit of the world map. Though, don't worry too much about it. Again, worry more so about the warring nations than who necessarily is where. Though that being said, really cool names for different parts of the archipelago. The Footsteps of the Gods is a really awesome name for a series of islands. Again, more awesome art right here. That is not Makagahum. That is somebody else. Makagahum is deeper down and very scary. All right, so on the topic of the nations, here are kind of roughly what they are aiming for. The Sultanate of Akai, our moon-worshipping people, has begun its divine striving. It has the strength, of course, and thus it begins a conquest to spread its power, to strengthen its mercantile reach. The Lakanit of Virbanwa has begun its Ashen colonization to conquer others and bring them under a single culture and religion. Again, these are the people that learn from colonialism. The Rajanit of Gatusan revels in bloodshed, and interpolity war escalates as a new god king must be declared. Katusan is very much about this kind of like lineage of it all. The kingdom of Bai rallies under a single woman, Chakravarti, their own great Avalokitesvara. Avalokitesvara. I'll work on it. They must spread the righteousness of Bai to the world to save it from the toils of samsara. The Confederation of Apumbukid is pushed to violence, traveling across the world to rid it of rising demon hordes as more people are killed indiscriminately and their souls become demons. So, like, everyone kind of thinks they know what's best for the world. And they are just kind of slamming each other's warriors into each other. Where does your Kadunganon factor into this? Are they with one of the nations? Are they a drifter? Have they been exiled from one of these nations? And how does that put them into conflict? Gubat Banwa's world is very much permitting you to just kind of land yourself within the conflict of it all. Also, Gubat Banwa, the Sword Isles, this is a world in its final age. Darkness is coming. The end of the world is near. That's something fun to take into account. Pre-colonial Southeast Asia eventually became post-colonial Southeast Asia, and that sucked. How are you going to interpret that in your game? Are you going to end before you get to that point? Are the Pale Kings going to return? Are they going to win? Gubat Banwa, as defined by the fiction, is a world on the brink of destruction. In one reason or another. Maybe that brink of destruction means Vir Banwa will unite them, all under their religion, all under their colonialism, having learned from the Pale Kings. And what happens to the world after that? Just fun little flavor to think about. A little bit of history, which I, again, definitely recommend reading through. However, I will not be doing so. Important part of history, though, is that the living incarnations of colonialism, the Pale Kings of Isohapa, are the ones that turned Vir Banwa into what it is today, and they were fought off by the 5 mandalas coming together and driven off. That was a very important part of the history of the world. They fought off colonialism, but some of them learned from it, and some of them, you know, are doing everything they can to escape it, etc. So, it's about time we get to the Kadunganon. About time we get to creating your character. Again, awesome art right here. You can really just revel in the diversity of appearance of all of these characters. I really love the person with bat wings. I also really love the tattooed person crawling out of that cave. Really, really awesome designs all around. So, the Kadunganon are the cavalry, the knights in shining armor, the traveling warriors who save the day, etc., etc., etc. Let's get to creating our characters. So you're going to choose your folk and culture, folk being race in the traditional TTRPG terms, bit of an outdated term, and also your culture being your mandala, and along that a subculture and lineage, which you can roll for, even if you're stuck on it. Assign these scores across your 8 actions, so your fire, light, darkness, etc., etc., etc. 4, 4, 3, 3, 2, 2, 1, 1. Simple enough. That means, you know, if you assign your fire to be a 4 and your water to be a 1, when you're doing express, you're going to be rolling 4d10. And when you try to do your water, when you try to, like, understand the mysteries of the world, you're rolling 1d10 and hoping for a success. And again, those numbers do increase as you level up, as your legend grows. Assign what your wrathful, gentle, and royal facets are. Again, all the roleplay stuff. Put those elements into where you think they fit into your character's personality. Choose 2 life events. Choose someone you have debt to. Establish a complication. These are all bits of backstory that are helpful. Like, if you're like me, and you usually just write out, like, 2 pages of backstory for your character, that'll probably already be in there. But you also fully have the option for rolling for it. Or if you're, like, doing a solo campaign about 2 characters, and you're kind of piloting 2 characters through the fiction, it might be nice to establish what all of this is so you know how to roleplay them. Timmy, yeah, you can fill out your new character sheet with this right now. Though keep in mind, you're all Legend 1. You're going to be not just 4, 4, 3, 3, 2, 2, 1, 1. That's Legend 0 stuff. You're going to add 1 to one of those numbers. Whatever it will be. We'll get there. We'll probably go over it off stream. Here's the combat stuff. You're gonna pick a discipline. or a class in modern TTRPG terms. You gain their traits, which are their innate abilities, and their inflict violences, which are their basic attacks. You do not start with any signature techniques. That's why, Timmy, also, we are not starting at Legend 0. You're going to start with 2 signature techniques. You're going to start being able to do War Speaker stuff. Or War Speaker and Head Taker stuff, if you want to, start there. If that's still a route you want to take for your character. So, jump, move, and HP are determined by your discipline. They are no longer stats that you can really mess around with. And before, move was the only one that you can mess around with. You're putting bravery, posture, faith, and resilience 4, 3, 2, and 1. Basically being, think of it kind of as like strength, magic, defense, and resistance, approximately. Just spread them across 4, 3, 2, 1. If you're Legend 1, like Timmy is, raise one of them by +1. Spoilers! Listen, I don't know what your character's gonna do. Alright. Let's see. Pick a name. Find your conviction, find your passions, which you will defend like a dying dog. Pick up a weapon and define the armor that guards your liver. You begin at Legend 0 with 5 honor and 1 thunderbolt. Then your Kadunganan awakes. So, you don't start with 0 honor, which means you can already start expending it, which is fun. Alright, let's go through the folk. Let's go through the different types of people you can become in the world of Gubat Banwa. Though, then again, Walks is very open about, like, you can kind of make things up. Here's some default ones, you can do whatever you want, because there aren't really mechanical effects to it. If you want to live as a frog folk or hornbill folk, feel free. These are just to inspire you. Be a shark person. Somebody needs to be a shark person. Your humans of Gubat Banwa are the bamboo folk. Really awesomely designed, and also very fun bit of lore as to how these people were created. Humans in the world of Gubat Banwa were kind of created from bamboo. I'm just going to read this paragraph because it's so fun. Kawayanon, or the bamboo folk, are the most populous folk in the Sword Isles, owing in no small part to their propensity to reproduce and intermingle with others, being social animals. Kawayanon are those born from a piece of bamboo that floated in the endless sea after multiple cosmogonies. They arose after a great king eagle pecked them out from their bamboo vessels. The first Kawayanon had no gender. However, an ancient devil eel known as Apung Gisibak fought with the great eagle in the sky and then deceived the Kawayanon to fight with him. As punishment for one of the first acts of violence, the Great Eagle and the Grand Sky came down and sundered the Kawayanon, inflicting gender upon them and enforcing a spiritual unity to be able to create new ones. In the world of Gubat Banwa, humans started out being able to asexually reproduce. Then they sided with the big scary eel, and then the gods said, nope, fuck you, split them in half, and now in order to reproduce, they gotta have intercourse. This lore is incredible. This game is incredible. I love it so much. The Iro, or the dog folk. In this, by the way, incredible art right here. One of my favorites. My friend Sakai, who was on the first Gubat Banwa charity stream, looked at this piece of art and he was like, that's my character. And that was his murder glaive, Ginu, who wanted to rid the world of loud noises so that his wife, who has very sensitive hearing, can sleep. By the way, this dogfolk, I believe, is canonically of Akai. I think they were referenced in the design document, hence them wearing a headscarf. Which is fun, bits of cultural stuff, even among the different races. The Kamikam are the cat folk. This one kind of looks like a weasel folk, but, you can easily play a character like that. The Laksaman are the monkey folk, which I'm very excited about. The Pilandokan are the deer folk, which is really awesome and not usually a type of character you see in a lot of TTRPGs. Tony's character in the Gubat Banwa anthology stream has deerfolk ancestry, so he looks human, he looks bamboo folk, but he does have antlers, which I think is very fun and awesome. They're also descended from the trickster god in the lore. Again, you should look through all of this yourself, because there's cool stuff like deer being descended from the trickster god. The Pakan are the bird folk. Again, the fiction doesn't necessarily the game doesn't necessarily give you abilities based on which folk you choose. You're not going to get to fly just because you choose a bird folk. But, that's kind of up to you, right? Play a bird folk, maybe you pick a Heaven Spear, who's the class all about jumping around and flying through the air and fighting with melee combat. Also, very good place to put a picture of a dragon folk, right? not a default lineage within Gubat Banwa, but when I look at this, I definitely do. I think a little bit of Baiku even, which is kind of their like China-inspired nation. Um, the world of the Sword Isles is not just the five mandalas. There are farther shores. There is Isohapa. There's Baiku, etc. Those are kind of just the main ones. And here we go. You can roll to see where you're from. Let's roll to see where our Manic Pixie Dream Girl is from, who needs to defeat bandits who took control of heaven or something. She's from, oh no, she's from Birbanwa. She's from the colonialist nation. You know, we're creating a really interesting character right here, which is something. And then there's information about each of the nations. There's some examples of Gatusana names, though there is a whole section at the end of the book. There's a table of 100 different names per nation that you can just kind of pick your favorites from. That's what I did for a lot of my NPCs. This art, by the way, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, anyone who's more familiar with Princess Murders the Hero, I believe this is the sister of the main character. This is the Invincible Gun Princess, I think. Maybe one of the coolest titles for a character I've ever heard. But she's really cool. Read Princess Murders the Hero, everybody. It talks a lot about the culture, the history of Gatusan. Another Princess Murders the Hero's character. Oh my god. I guess it does kind of start in Gatusan, doesn't it? So there is absolutely all history talking about Gatusan, who the ruler is, etc. Oh, I think maybe we take a second to look through who the current ruler of Gatusan is, because I think it's very fun. Do I have a page number? For which part? The names? That's like way at the bottom. Way at the end. Noteworthy person number 1 of Gatusan is Ponong Raja Batara Ambasi. Sits upon his high-backed bamboo throne, a bamboo dais, whereupon he sits in a lotus position overlooking the throne hall of the Dawn Eater Longhouse Palace, which takes a person a few minutes to walk from end to end. His presence looms over all. Like a god, he watches. Whenever a visitor enters, he lifts his right hand with the pointer finger pointed at the visitor, and the other fingers touching the thumb palm raised up. This is the Thunderbolt Mudra, to show that he can remove the visitor from Kalibutan easily. His arms are covered in bangles and armlets of pure gold until his hands, which are scarred and tattooed so that they look like tiger claws. So this is a guy who either is a tiger or looks like a tiger. There's more description in here. It's cool. This is a really cool game. It's a really cool world. They talk about more people. Sambaha, another character from Princess Murders the Hero. Read Princess Murders the Hero. You can roll for what subculture you have, basically being like what place you're from in Gatusan, which is very helpful. Are you ever annoyed at your players, GMs, for not just picking a village and like telling you where they come from? They kind of just manifested from the ether. Well, it's part of Gubat Banwa. You have to figure out where you're from, what your personality is, etc., what your class background is. We have Apumbukid. We have descriptions of each of the different rulers of Apumbukid, what they do, what facets of Apumbukid they look over. Also, just fun bits of flavor. They list some of the Apumbukid honorifics. They don't say Bayi for their princess-type people. They say Akbaye, etc. Bayi being the Gatusan one, which I just remembered is how they refer to the main character, Princess Murders the Hero. Let's scroll down. Apumbukid is cool, but you can read this by yourself. I know you will, Timmy, because that's what you do. Here we go. Let's scroll back down. Little section on lineages. We're down to Akai. And you can roll to see where your character comes from. You know, maybe they were conscripted, etc. Another one of my favorite bits of art. By the way, very different style from the other ones we saw. This was the art previously used for the Baril Gun Devil, who is a character that appeared in Tony's section of the Gubat Banwa anthology. Big scary villain, big scary enemy type. What I really want to get to is the description of Virbanwa's current ruler, Huan Rekno, because it's pretty wild. It's pretty wild to say the least. And just kind of like goes to show the innate magic of the world of Gubat Banwa. Forget like kings sitting on their thrones and not doing anything. Let's take a look at the ruler of Gubat Banwa. Excuse me, not of Gubat Banwa, of the Lakaneta Vir Banwa. Noteworthy person, Pinakalakan Huan Rekno. The current Pinalakan is a man named Huan Rekno, who is directly related to Lakan Lupu. He is said to be a nobleman wearing a cape and leather boots at all times, mixing it with his bahag and baro to get up whenever he descends upon the world. When he must present himself as he truly is, the manifestation of Makagahum upon the earth, he is like a saint that has fallen upon the world. It is said that around his neck floats a halo of thorns, which is said to signify the world upon his shoulders as he performs penance of trying to unite the islands. He wears a gigantic crown fashioned like a halo of flames, with 4 cardinal points depicting a crocodile, a dog, a serpent, and an eagle. This crown burns from behind his head like a bonfire of his duty. His gown is not made of cloth, but rather of stone feathers plucked from slain angel wings, those too weak to properly protect Makagahum's chosen. The stone wings wrap around him, ivory and marble-like, and his face is in a perpetual pained countenance. One of my favorite parts, I'll skip down. His feet never touch the floor. Whenever his feet touch the earth, the halo digs spears into his neck. He floats with the strength of his faith. May Makagahum be blessed. That's the guy who rules the colonialist nation. That's not even one of the Pale Kings. That's just the guy who's in charge of Virbanwa. Great final boss, right? If you want to take that route with your campaign, reflavor an Ashen Vicar character, stat block, and boom, done. Oh, here he is. Here's Makagahum, the person that, or the deity that Virbanwa worships. Addie said it looked like a persona at one point, I believe. Fun stuff. I think it was Addie. Was it Timmy? It was somebody who I hang with. Bai, which I need to look more into because Bai is so freaking cool, but I want to get to the combat part. I want to talk about Gubat Banwa's combat. Point being, you can look through all this, you can learn the history of your nation, you can roll for where your character is from. Life events, boom, backstory, right here. You can literally roll for it. You blasphemed the Lord before and you were kicked out of your community. Easy, done, love it. You can literally roll for aspects of your backstory. You can roll for who you have debt to. Maybe you do have debt to famed Mangangaya of Gatusan Sambaha, who was a noble, royalty born to Salip Ulapu, to the royal clan of Dimantag, but treated you as an equal. Maybe you have debt to her. Maybe she saved you in combat against a Pale King, etc. Here's the complications. Again, you can roll for them. It's nice. You know, I love blank, but so does blank. We know this, but the one we love does not. You can just infuse your character's roleplay with all of this. It is required that you have convictions, that you have complications. Maybe your conviction is revenge. What goes around comes around. The circle is unbroken, and it brings with it the spike of judgment. Revenge, easy motivation. That description, awesome, gorgeous, beautiful. Talks a little bit about your warband. You know, Kadunganan are kind of want to form little groups of themselves to accomplish their duties. They can be a lord and their vassals. They can be wandering warriors, which I think is kind of what the anthology streams are leaning towards. Servants of divinity, knights, princes, etc. You can kind of choose how your group gets together. Also, look at this awesome group of Kadunganan right here. I definitely want to see a campaign about them, because look at that Doflamingo-ass dog person. Combined with, like, this Samurai Champloo looking character, it's great. Hell yeah. Not necessarily Samurai Champloo looking, because that's neither Jin nor Mugen. Anyway, I'm a fake fan. It's fine. Let's scroll down, because I think we are getting into the combat. New bits of art, by the way, by someone that Dill tagged on Twitter. I forget their name. But really, really awesome new art for these Gatusanan looking characters. It's about time we get to violence. About time we get to combat. In the YouTube upload, things will be divided into sections. Welcome to the violence section. Welcome to the part of where you, like, actually learn how to do the actual combat of Gubat Banwa. Like I was saying, you're going to be rolling big fistfuls of dice, dependent on your stats, rather than adding like a bunch of modifiers and things like that. You're defining the victory and defeat conditions. You're looking at a map because, yes, this is a game that works best with a map, like Lancer, like D&D 4th Edition, like Final Fantasy Tactics, etc. You can do a theater of the mind. That is totally possible. It's going to be hard to keep track of stuff. I did that for the charity stream, and it was definitely hard to keep track of stuff. I had to like kind of shrug off a lot of things that happened because pushing just suddenly wasn't really relevant anymore. Though I think there is a guide for how to do that. Sometimes there's more interesting ways to end combat than defeating all the enemies. You know, you can ensure the escape route, survive for 6 full turns, recruit 4 fighters, etc. These are all things that are provided for you. Again, very Final Fantasy Tactics, very Fire Emblem inspired. The rhythm is the order that Gubat Banwa combat goes in. It is changed from 1.3. 1.3 had a whole system about where if there was one enemy left, they would take alternating turns. That has been nerfed a lot, which is it's good. I think ultimately it's good. I do miss how like fun and silly it was, but I think this makes a little bit more sense for balance. Enemies always go first in Gubat Banwa, and then it's player, enemy, player, enemy, player, enemy, sticking to that pattern as much as possible, and just making sure that nobody goes twice in a row. So if someone begins the round, make sure they don't end the round, because when it comes back to the start, it'll be them, and then they would have gone twice in a round. We don't like that. Broadly speaking, for enemies, their sentinels or guards will go first, followed by their witches, their magic DPS, their raiders, their melee DPS, their sharpshooters, their range DPS, and their mediums, which is their healers and support characters. Broadly speaking, that's going to be the order that you're going to make the enemies go through. I should also say, violence combat in Gubat Banwa is very much evocative of, like, Southeast Asian war drums going, so a lot of these terms are named after like music. Like rather than a turn, you have a riff. Rather than a combat round, you have a resound, etc. Something kind of confusing is these are different terms from 1.3, but I assume these ones are a little bit more consistent with music notation. You have a few different basic techniques. Like Pathfinder, you get 3 actions in combat, or 3 beats per riff. Yes, 3 beats per riff that you can do. You can rush, that is move. You can deflect, which allows you to, parry on 5+ instead of 6+. You can do your inflict violences, or your basic attacks. You can do your signature techniques, which are the big techniques that your discipline can do. You can rally, which heals 2 and then cleanses a single status. You can only do it once per violence. This replaces the surge ability from 1.3, which was allowed you to heal 1/3 of your hit points and then cleanse all for do a lot of stuff. Rally is a more moderate version of that. I think rally makes sense. I think it makes more sense than surge. Surge is very powerful. I will say there was one sentinel class in 1.3 that could surge 3 times per violence instead of 1. They could basically give themselves 30 extra HP. It was incredible. It was incredible. Anyway. You can shove. You can push an adjacent fighter by 1 tile. That is fully an option. Where Fire Emblem Path of Radiance, maybe you can interact with an item you have. Anything that triggers off interaction, anything following the fiction, does not count making attacks. Or you can climb, which allows you to double your jump and then rush 1 tile. Because you do need a jump stat to be able to get to certain elevations, etc. Your combat stats or your prowesses, your HP or hit pearls is a little bit more allied with the flavor of Gubat Banwa. You're staggered when you're at half HP, and when you hit 0 HP and you start taking damage, you're still up, but you start taking wounds, which are kind of like your death saving throws, or death failures, I should say. When you get 5 wounds, you're defeated. You're out of combat, whatever that means for you. Whether that is death, or whether that is losing the combat and needing to flee. So that is something that's also different, and also why it's kind of okay that HP totals are so low in Gubat Banwa 1.4. I did a test combat with a Flower Balion, which is kind of like a necromancer witch with floral flavoring. Um, and she only has 6 HP, and she was brought below 0, but then she was taking wounds instead of um, uh, just instantly getting killed past 0. So she like functionally had 11 HP instead of 6. So the wound system is there to kind of make up for the less HP that characters have. Enemies in general have less HP. Characters, not so much. They do all kind of have that extra 5, which is nice. You have speed, which is how many squares you can move. Diagonals only cost 1 speed, which is something good to keep track of. Jumping is the elevation difference you can leap to or fall from. Heaven Spears, not worried about falling, because they have like 5 jump, 6 jump, something wild. So like 2 jump means you cannot go to a tile that has like 3 elevation, from 0 elevation. Your bravery is like your physical attack stat, determines your physical might, the ferocity of your strikes, accuracy of bow shots, sureness of sword blows. Attacks made with bravery are always physical, a flurry of fists, a flashing steel, combination of swords, etc. Though, I believe the War Speaker Witch, which attacks with their words, also functions off of bravery, so it is still a little bit flexible. Faith determines the strength of your spirituality, the sharpness of your will, how easy you can reach across the divide between worlds and touch what is not meant to be touched. Attacks made with faith are always magical. Often healing scales off of faith as well. Again, there is still some flexibility to this. The Martyr, which is kind of the closest thing to Gubat Banwa's Berserker, attacks off of faith because they are so dedicated to their conviction, often their religion, if you go with the Akai flavor, so that they're attacking with like burning sword strikes, etc. Posture is your physical defense stat. It's more about parrying, rather than like just like clink, like taking hits that do no damage, a la Fire Emblem. That also adds to the fiction, so it's not like, oh, you take 0 damage because you're big and strong. It's like, no, they landed 5 hits. Well, sorry, you got 5 parries. Boom, 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 boom. You block all the attacks. Resilience, your toughness, hardiness, your ability to weather the hurricane. That is your resistance against magic. All right, so again, I did kind of go over this before, but basically in Gubat Banwa in combat, if you are attacking with bravery, your physical attack, you're going to roll a number of d10s equal to your bravery stat. Let's say it's 5. Boom, you roll that, you count up the numbers that are 6 and higher. The defender is going to roll a number of 8-sided dice equal to their defense stat. So against bravery, that would be their posture. They would roll that, they'd count up the 6s and higher. That's their defend dice. Hits cancel out parries, and you see what's left over to determine how much damage is dealt. If no damage is dealt by a Kadunganan, then they gain a Thunderbolt, which is great. You never have a useless turn. Again, think about D&D, all those useless turns. They saved against Hold Person. Sorry, I guess nothing happens. In this case, you still gain a Thunderbolt, which means you can use that to deal extra damage on another turn, or change the weather, or give yourself another turn. Thunderbolts are really cool, and the lower HP totals make them a lot more effective. Like Pathfinder, you do take penalties to taking attack options. Specifically, your second attack will use 2 less dice, and your third will lose 3 less dice if you decide to make a bunch of attacks in one turn. So it motivates you to do things besides walk up and attack, because you have a lot of other things you can do. Maybe your discipline has an ability that lets you light your sword on fire. Maybe you do that and then attack and then parry. Like, boom, that's a great turn right there. Evade is something new. Evade and guard are new to 1.4. Evade is a positive status effect. While you have evade, you have a 50% chance of completely dodging an attack, ignoring its effects against you. Roll this before the attack, I guess, to save time. You might be wondering, like, how do I calculate evade? How do I roll a 50% chance? You can roll a percentile die, or you could even just, like, roll a d4. 1 and 2, it still hits. 3 and 4, it still misses. You can do the math that way. Guard, when you guard something, it's almost always adjacent. While guarding another fighter, when they suffer an attack, there's a 50% chance of the target changing to you instead of the original target. Guard breaks when you move away or move further away from the one you're guarding. These are kind of rare status effects, but they are very, very cool. For example, the Mender class has a parasol or shield that they can shoot out. And when enemies try and attack someone adjacent to the parasol guards them. There's a 50% chance they hit the umbrella instead of your ally, for example. Let's see. All right. One of my favorite parts of Gubat Banwa, the thing that made me fall in love with 1.3 when I opened the book, was honestly just the nostalgia of looking at these images. It is so Final Fantasy Tactics. It is beautiful. And this is even just an illustration to show what these effects look like, which is really nice. A burst is an attack that hits like a certain radius around a point of origin, and it can be like a wide burst too. Like if you have a burst 3 attack, it's hitting a big chunk of the battlefield. If you have a blast, that is kind of like an adjacent burst. You can kind of think of it. This is a blast 2 right there. That's a Murderglaive technique, I believe. Line, pretty straightforward. You just kind of go in a straight line. Even though there's a firing of a bullet that seems to strike the first enemy in the line, I'm pretty sure that in this example it would go through both of them because both of those tiles are lit up. Lines tend to go hitting everything in the path. Not like a ranged attack, which just picks one tile. And a path is something unique to Gubat Banwa. It's like a line, but you can change the shape of it. There's some classes that can create, or disciplines that can create walls following certain paths, or create magic effects following certain paths that like snake around and hit multiple enemies. Here's a large list of the different status effects. For example, if an attack has the dazzling status, it inflicts dazzle or daze, meaning they can't take ranged attacks, I believe, etc. They've been changed from 1.3. They've been condensed a lot. You don't have to worry about skewering versus a bunch of others, because like the skewering is rare. Don't worry too much about it. Point being, it's been simplified. Now, in order to replace the elemental system of 1.3, many different elemental statuses were introduced. So in 1.3, everybody had an elemental weakness and an elemental resistance, and an element that they could make their attacks. So it was a very complicated, very fun, but very complicated game. In this, elements are much more focused on certain attacks. So, for example, you might have an attack that sets a flame. You're the Busalian, one of the big spellcasters of this. They can inflict the Aflame status. Every end of Riff, you take one true hit and you're vulnerable to attacks that douse, cleansed by being doused. So you're hit by a fire attack that makes you vulnerable to water, and you also take one true hit. And there's a lot of fun interactions. Like, you can douse an enemy, you can like hit them with a water attack. Let's say you're a Swordfish Cavalier. From there, you can chill them, or you can like shock them and it deals extra damage. Shock, I want to go over because I mentioned it before with the Bolt Fruit that you can take. If, let's say, you take an action, you take a beat to eat the Bolt Fruit. Your sword is energized. You're a martyr, so you anoint it with oils. It'll deal extra damage. You make your attack. You inflict a shock condition. Your opponent cannot make attacks, and they suffer +2 dice from all attacks against them. You cleanse it after they suffer an attack. So the next ally that runs in after the martyr and just kicks the ass of whatever enemy the martyr just hit is doing 2 extra die. So very impactful to have these status effects. It's nice that they're not always there. As much as I do miss the Pokemon type of it all, it's nice to keep it simple. Elemental interactions, just kind of again going over. For example, if you're doused, attacks that set aflame clear douse. Any enemy that suffers douse twice becomes chilled, which is a very fun status effect. Chilled is a new one. Every tile is difficult terrain and your jump becomes 1 and you're vulnerable to fire. So chilling enemies is a good way to make sure they don't move. Swordfish Cavalier's whole kit now involves a lot around like inflicting chilled and like kiting enemies, doing AoEs. It's cool. It's really cool. There's a list of objects that can be in the field. I think trees in this game are really fun. They're a size 1, height 3 object. And if they're chopped down, you're going to roll to see where they fall, and then they're going to topple, basically, which is fun. You know, there's more we can go over. Again, there's a lot that's really just worth like sitting and parsing by yourself. We're getting closer to the bit where we go over the disciplines, so I do want to get to that. All right, so here we go. here are your disciplines, the part that you've been waiting for, the part that, one of the first parts that excited me about Gubat Banwa, and for a build maniac like me, for someone who loves Fire Emblem, Final Fantasy, Tactics, etc., for its class systems, this is the stuff that I love to dig into. There's 5 rough class archetypes in Gubad Banwa. The Raiders are the damage dealers from up close, made to rush across the battlefield. Those are your melee DPS. The Sharpshooters are your ranged attackers, befitting from keeping away from their targets, as well as targeting large swaths of the battlefield. Those are your ranged DPS. Sentinels are defenders, stewards of their allies. They're meant to take hits and get stronger as they do. Those are your tanks. Witches inflict ailments upon their targets, hamstringing and hobbling others and weakening them. Your ranged DPS and also your status inflictors. Mediums grant support and blessings to their allies, keeping them alive. The old Saboteur versus Synergist combo in Final Fantasy XIII. These are very broad archetypes. There's a lot of variance within them. Every Sentinel is different. Every Raider is different. And significantly so. Not just mechanically, but also flavor-wise. So, we're going to start going through the disciplines. I've only playtested a handful of them in 1.4, but I playtested the rest in 1.3. Each discipline has 4 signature techniques. We'll go over that once we get to the first. So something else that's fun, and one of the reasons it's so easy to remember all of the mandalas, all the nations of Gubat Banwa, is that these disciplines, these classes, all have roots in different nations. Gatusan, this sea-raiding nation of freewheeling warriors fighting for glory. Associated with crocodiles, whimsical sword poets, warrior Balyans who commune with spirits, but often in a fun, whimsical way with a lot of chanting and war dancings. The Mangangaya, the premier sea raiders of Gubat Banwa, and the Kawal, the defenders. These are some of the disciplines of Gatusan. So first, I want to go over the Buaya Lancer. It's a shame that this version of the print cuts it off, but you can see it here. I just want to say, this image, when I saw somebody riding a crocodile for the first time in Gubat Banwa in the book, actually not this image, but a chibi one used for the generic Sentinel class in 1.3, I knew that there was nothing like it that I had played before. To me, the Buaya Lancer is the most emblematic Gubat Banwa class, because I look at this and I'm like, I have not seen anything like this in any other TTRPG. Which excited me so much. The flavor is so specific, the design is so specific. Wax and Dill really created something special. I'm going to use the Buaya Lancer as an example for how the disciplines work. So once you get to the disciplines, you see a little bit of text talking about how this style of fighting developed. Because martial arts in the Sword Isles are not just punching and kicking, it is the art of combat. So it talks about like the role of crocodiles, of Buaya within the Sword Isles, how they're respected, how they're seen as ancestors, powerful and wrathful, and also that they're a very well-known discipline across the Sword Isles, which is quite cool. List some of their weapons: tridents, harpoons, fishing rods, shields, etc. So these are mostly for flavor. You're gonna like pick a weapon, but unless it's an anting or a magic item, it's gonna be for flavor. So you don't have to necessarily give your Buaya Lancer a spear. You know, you can give them a sword. That's allowed, even though they're called Buaya Lancer, because there's no mechanical effect. They can even be a punching melee fighter, as long as it makes sense with the fiction. I think Gon from Hunter x Hunter would probably be a Buaya Lancer, with all of the locking down and grappling that they tend to do. So, with every discipline, they start with a trait. So for the Buaya Lancer, for example, they always have a lair, which is a burst 1 aura, so like in a 1 square radius around them. Any enemy that ends their riff adjacent to your aura are pulled 1 into the aura. Any enemy that tries to leave your aura must spend +1 speed, and you may inflict violence on them once per riff. You, as a Buaya Lancer, the way you defend people is that you have this big crocodilian aura, you suck enemies into there, and if they try to leave, you chomp them. It's awesome. And here's what I was saying before about how the disciplines have fixed HP and everything. If you're a Buai Lancer, you have 11 HP, functionally kind of like 16 with the wound system. 4 speed, meaning you can travel 4 squares. 1 jump, you're not very good at jumping. You can't really get to panels with 2 elevation unless you take a climb action. And +1 to your posture and resilience. So choosing a discipline does increase your stats. So Timmy, you know, when you're making that War Speaker, you are going to be adding some to the stats here. Your inflict violences are your basic attacks, but it's not just like, oh, I roll bravery and deal damage. This is Gubat Banwa. Every inflict violence has awesome effects and awesome flavor. We're not going to go through every discipline as deeply. I want to save that for another stream. I probably will want to break it into like, here are all the raider classes, here are all the sentinel classes, etc., so people can pick their favorites, but I am going to do a little overview of the Buai Lancer and then just kind of briefly describe all the others so you can like maybe pick one that appeals to you. The Buai Lancers inflict violences, their basic attacks. Harpoon, attack a fighter within 2 tiles with bravery, dousing them. Remember that status effect, you douse them. This is still a melee attack, pull 1 afterwards. If you already douse them, you hit them again, boom, they're chilled. They're going to have trouble moving, which is really bad for them against a Buai Lancer who keeps sucking them in. So again, that's your basic attack. It has long range and it yanks them in. And again, you know, with the flavor of the fiction, if you want to make Gon from Hunter x Hunter, you can flavor it as him like grabbing them and yanking them in. That's allowed. Barreling Dragon, move half your speed and then taunt all adjacent enemies until the end of your next riff. Something nice about Gubat Banwa 1.4 is that it will list on the side what a lot of these status effects do, so you don't have to keep scrolling back to the Violence Compendium. Taunt, when you taunt an enemy, their attack dice on attacks that don't include you as a target suffers 2 dice. Minimum 1. Just in case there's any other effects they have. So if you are a defender, there's a few ways that you can keep your allies safe as a sentinel, in Gubat Banwa turns. There's forced movement, a la the Buai Lancer sucking people in so that they can't move away, pulling people towards them. There's also statuses like Taunt or Provoke in the previous edition of Gubat Banwa, where you make it so that they basically have to attack you or else they suffer penalties. So it's very efficient to like move, taunt enemies, and then take a deflect action to give yourself extra defense. And your third inflict violence. Snapping Dragon, your crocodile snaps, attack an adjacent fighter with bravery, then slide them to any other adjacent square. Again, this forced movement with the sentinels. So again, these are your basic attacks. Your basic attacks: Harpoon, stab, pull. Barreling Dragon, move, taunt. Snapping Dragon, attack, slide. There's nothing that's just attack and add a number to it. So if you are a Legend 0 Kadunganon, if you're starting the game, this is all you have. You have your trait, which is your, in the case of Buai Lancer, your Burst 1 aura, your Crocodile Lair aura, and your 3 basic attacks, and then all those actions you could take. Your Rally, your Deflect, etc. We scroll down a bit, and then we start getting to the disciplines, the liberations, and the techniques, the liberations, and the enlightenments. You might recall earlier, I was saying that once you pick a discipline, you gain 2 techniques. They can be from this discipline that you started with, or other ones. You can mix and match. It's innate multiclassing. It's great. So let's say you level up to a Legend 1 Buai Lancer. You gain these signature techniques. You gain Dragon Seizes the Sky, which is an ability that can use multiple beats, multiple actions, or just one. Which is another thing unique about Gubat Banwa that I'm very glad remained in 1.4. Dragon Seizes the Sky. If you're a Legend 1 Buai Lancer, you have the ability to seize an adjacent warrior and bring them with you. Spend 1 beat to rush, bringing up to 2 adjacent fighters with you, keeping adjacency. This movement is considered forced movement unless the target is willing. So boom, you have a technique where you can move enemies or move allies. If you want to spend 2 beats, though, you can upgrade it. You can upgrade it to Crocodile Jaws. Spend 2 beats to inflict 1 true hit when you seize an enemy. So you're not just forcibly moving enemies, you just deal, boom, 1 guaranteed damage. And again, when some enemies have like 5 HP, that's pretty impactful. Dragon Seizes the Moon. If you have all 3 beats available, you can spend 3 beats to slam the target down after the movement, attacking all enemies in an area. Burst 1 of the target with bravery. You can choose to exclude the target. So if you're only spending 1 beat, you move an enemy or an ally. you move an enemy, let's say in this case. If you want to spend 2 beats, you can move them and deal some damage. If you want to spend 3 beats, you can move them and then slam them down after the movement, dealing an AoE. This is very interesting in practice. What I have found in Gubat Banwa, and one of the reasons that playing it on a map is so important compared to Theater of the Mind, is these abilities. If you don't need to take a turn to move, your enemies are in big trouble because you're going to be doing these big 3-beat cost techniques and doing 1,000,000 damage to them. So, ironically, one of the worst places an enemy in Gubat Banwa can be is right in front of you. Because then that means, you know, assuming your HP is fine, you take the whole turn to do your big attack. You knock them into the air, slam them, hit them back down, etc. So you gain 2 techniques when you become a Buaya Lancer. So yes, you gain Dragon Seizes the Sky. You can gain Dragon Tail Style, or you can mix and match. You can scroll down to Kowal and maybe take their first trait, because you do have to learn their techniques in order. You can take Roaring Storm Challenge. We'll go over the disciplines much briefer than I'm going over the Buaya Lancer. Dragon Tail Style is a new addition to 1.4. I really like that the Buaya Lancer has much more of an offensive presence rather than just a movement and defensive one. They kind of just allow, they're able to do like a big blast. With 1 beat, it slows enemies, reducing their movement. You spend 2 beats to blow them wide open, which will let them suffer attacks, multiple attacks in a row from you without losing die, so you can even slam them, harpoon them, etc., and taunt them. If you spend 3, rush 3 before the attack, and then 1 adjacent target is stunned. Now, the third level, or the third technique in the Buaya Lancer roster, the Deathly Roll, is kind of the big reason I was talking about with, oh, you don't want to end your turn next to a Kadunganan, a melee Kadunganan in this case. You know, you spend 1 beat to attack an adjacent fighter on the same elevation of you with Bravery plus 2 dice. The attack has Overwhelming, which I believe, I should double check it, Overwhelming, I think if you roll a 10, you roll an extra die, something like that, which is fun. If the target is slowed or stunned, this hits on a 4+. If you spend 2 beats, you can target up to 3 targets in Blast 3 with the Deathly Roll. And you can spend 3 beats to heal 1 per hit inflicted after parries. So, if you end your turn next to Buaya Lancer, which you want to do because they're really good at sucking you in, and at least if they're at least Legend 2, assuming they can get this far, they can grab you, whirl you around, deal a bunch of damage, heal. It's really fun. This multi-beat meta of Gubat Banwa is very interesting. It does also mean that after Legend 0, you might not necessarily be doing Harpoon just for damage anymore, because now there's all these other damaging techniques, but they don't all have the same effect of Harpoon, which douses enemies and then pulls them. So there is still utility to these basic techniques, which is nice. I want to talk briefly about the last part about these disciplines, which is the Enlightenment and Liberation. You can see on the right, your Enlightenment is another innate trait that you unlock when you learn 2 techniques in this discipline. In the case of the Buaya Lancer, let's say you learn your forced movement and your Dragon Tail ability. Boom, you gain a new technique. You are immune to water terrain, and you cannot be chilled. When you suffer an attack that douses, you may rush 1, sliding. Whenever you end your rift, roll your Bravery. For every 5+, pull a fighter within burst 5 by 1 title. Boom, you have 1 tile, excuse me. Boom, you have a new innate. You have some resistance against water, some extra consequences when water is used upon you, etc. Now, your Liberation is only unlocked when you learn all 4 techniques, because it tends to be a very powerful technique. The Liberation is Makara aspect. On Resound 3, or Round 3, you may channel your piety and reverence to strengthen the Buaya you ride upon, turning them into a legendary Makara. Spend 1 beat. You become size 2, height 2. You ignore all terrain, you heal 1 when you start your rift, and you gain +1 to your posture and resilience. Your Liberation, you can think of it as your ult. Your ultimate ability. It is only unlocked when you learn all 4 techniques in your discipline. Now, I did say you can mix and match. Does that mean you can learn multiple Enlightenments and multiple Liberations? Like, let's say you're splitting all your levels between Buaya Lancer and Kowal, the shield-wielding person that I had below this. No, you gotta pick 1 Enlightenment, you gotta pick 1 Liberation. But I can really only imagine the possibilities of mixing and matching a lot of these techniques. Having a character that inflicts provoke, like the Buwaya Lancer, and then like taking a lot of the innate defensive abilities of the Kowal will probably just make you like invincible. So thank you so much for bearing with me on that. We're not going to go through all of the disciplines this thoroughly, but I did kind of want to demonstrate how these disciplines work. They have 3 inflict violences, 3 basic attacks, which all have additional utility. They have innate traits. They unlock more innate traits as you go further down the line, and they have multiple techniques, which can be multi-beat abilities, which greatly impact the tides of battle. Now, that being said, I'm going to very quickly go through the rest of the disciplines and then go through the rest of the book. I'll try to wrap this in about a half hour because my voice is getting tired. Hold on. So I'm just going to do brief little overviews of all the other disciplines, also because I've only play tested most of them in 1.3, not 1.4 yet, though I have looked through their abilities. Your Kowal is kind of your classical defender. It's very straightforward. It is perhaps even more straightforward than the Buwaya Lancer, but it doesn't appear first because things are alphabetical. They are all about guarding enemies. So guarding is a way that another way of defense in addition to force movement and taunt. Like I mentioned before, guarding is a 50% chance that the Kowal takes the hit instead. They, by the basic rules of Gubat Banwa, have a big shield, though of course you can just be like a big defender who fights with your fists even. Again, it's allowed. So this is going to be your most straightforward defender. Their ultimate, they declare a Bulu, which is like a duel with one enemy, meaning they like have to attack each other or start taking penalties. So it's an even more straightforward attacker than the Buwaya Lancer, or defender than the Buwaya Lancer. A lot less about forced movement and much more about guarding and also increasing your block on yourself. So you want to take those hits. The Manganga Ya is kind of the premier raider of Gubat Banwa. Again, it appears on the cover. This is a very mobile attacker. A lot of its techniques are inspired by Arnis, which is most commonly known as a Filipino fighting stick martial art. This is a lot of attack, move in, move out. So very fun swashbuckling flavor in the classical sense. Moving down, we have the Sword Poet, which is one of my favorite sentinels. They are all about taunting, they are all about provoking, and they also inflict debuffs, which is very fun. The Warrior Balian is one of the more complicated mediums in the game, so it's kind of hard that it is one of the first ones that you see. But the Warrior Balian summons a spirit that protects allies and bolsters them, and they also do ritual chants that do like AoEs in terms of both damage and buffs. Keep scrolling. All right, we are down to Apum Bukid, baby. This is the indigenous Filipino-inspired nation. The Busalian, formerly known as the Makinad Manon, I would probably say, even though it is fairly complex, is one of your more straightforward magic DPS classes. They're all about elemental attacks. Inflicting these elemental statuses, they can choose what form they take on each turn, which also means that there is some fun synergy there. You can douse an enemy and then set them aflame next turn to deal extra damage. So they are going to be swapping elements and dealing a bunch of different blasts. I'd say if you want like a traditional like wizard sorcerer type who just deals a lot of damage, stick with that. The Death Dancer, I sometimes refer to it as the JoJo stand user just because of this art. Though they kind of are more like what you'd imagine your like punch kick martial artist to be. That being said, they're one of the classes I playtested today. Holy shit, they are insane. And yes, they do have a little bit of aura to them. This might be my new favorite discipline. I'll go over them more in detail later, but they just deal a lot of damage. They move, and then if they're next to you, they destroy you. I want to just look at this Hornbill Blade Kick ability. Spend 1 beat to attack an adjacent fighter with bravery and then juggle them. So you knock them into the air, and attacks against them ignore combo breaker, meaning you don't lose die if you attack them consecutively. Spend 2 beats to attack them again immediately afterwards with bravery plus faith. Okay, so there's investment to keep your faith higher, not just because of one of their innate abilities, but also because you can Hornbill Blade Kick, knock them into the air, slam them with a big handful of dice. Then they can do King Eagle Rends the Sky Sea, spend 3 beats to attack them again with Bravery plus Faith. You can slam the target to the ground, ending juggled, add Overwhelming and Skewering to the attack, and then stun them. You become wide open until the end of your next rift afterwards. Tiny typo, end foe, your next rift. Just should be of. But, you know, there's so many words. This is like an 800-page document. You die if you're next to a Death Dancer, basically, because they slam, boom, boom, slam, and then inflict a bunch of statuses on you. They're so cool. I love them. Head Taker, I know, is a class that Timmy is very excited about. This is kind of like your assassin. They attack from stealth, they pick a ritual kill, and they deal a bunch of extra damage to them, basically. I'm going to try to go through them quickly, because my voice is getting a little bit tired. Your Tigpana is one of the more straightforward sharpshooters of Gubat Banwa. It's like a sentinel archer. They're very good at like attacking enemies that have taken movement to like really start steadily piling on the damage. War Speaker is what Timmy plays in the Gubat Banwa anthology. They are all about forced movement, despite being like a ranged DPS type character. So they're going to be shuffling enemies around, confusing them, etc. After that, we are on to Akai, which is our moon-worshipping, Islam-inspired nation. Beast Hunter is the first one. They've gotten... They have a bit of variety because they can choose what pet they have. They're all about traps. They attack from range quite well. A lot of affecting the battlefield, which is nice. The Martyr is sick. The Martyr is the best Berserker type class I've ever seen in a TTRPG. It really puts the Barbarian Berserker from 5e to shame, or the Berserker Barbarian from 5e to shame, because they just deal so much damage, and every turn they get even stronger. The Simonic Knight got a huge rework compared to 1.3. In 1.3, they were all about like flying around the battlefield and dropping boulders, and it's kind of hard to explain smite mechanic, which they still have, where they can kind of like attack enemies if they like break certain rules that they inflict upon them. They were made into like much more versatile attackers here. They're much more based around ranged attacks now. The Sarimonok, by the way, being like you can kind of think of it as like the Garuda, the like rainbow bird, that they ride upon. You don't necessarily have to ride a bird, you know? Again, the thing about Gubat Banwa is flavor. You can just be somebody who is like very mobile, and very tanky. They got a nice buff, basically. I haven't play tested it yet, but they got a nice buff. Strifesinger has also changed a lot from 1.3. This is kind of much more similar to the archetypal bard. There's a lot of I attack while boosting and healing my allies, which is nice. It's definitely nice and straightforward. A lot less about forced movement because they were kind of like pseudo war speaker before. Swordfish Cavalier design-wise, concept-wise, I think one of my favorite disciplines. They're all about movement and AoE attacks. They have this like splash ability where they attack an enemy and then boom, they inflict extra damage on enemies around them as well. But now with all these status effects, they will douse and chill you like crazy. All of this water and ice theming to their attacks. We are on to Vir Banwa. We are on to the not Catholic nation. We start with the Barrel Witch, which, oh my goodness, is one of the most fragile classes in Gubat Banwa. They accumulate Gun Charge, which deals extra damage and can be used as a resource, but if they take too much, their gun explodes. Imagine if Diddy's up B, if Diddy Kong's up B in Smash was a character's entire kit. The Barrel Witch is pretty complex to play, I would say. And they're very fragile, but they deal a lot of damage, and they have a lot of really fun abilities. High risk, high reward. Blade Weaver is kind of like your sword and sorcery knight, though they're a little bit less focused on attacking and magic AoEs, a la like Eldritch Knight or Hexblade, and more about like boosting allies. They're kind of a little bit like melee cleric-like. They have a lot of fun movement abilities too, from what I recall. Murderglaive has also been reworked quite a bit. The Murderglaive has become like much more similar to the I control this zone and I attack you type of Sentinel. Also very much reminiscent of Guts from Berserk, which is fun. So let's see. Whenever you start your rift, you gain malice. When you are attacked by when you are attacked or an enemy leaves an adjacent tile of you can spend 1 malice to immediately inflict 1 hit on them. When an enemy in burst 3 of you starts the rift while you have malice, roll a d6. If the result is equal to or lower than your current malice, you become their only valid target from that rift. You're vulnerable to attacks of Holy Radiance. So you are a big dark defender that deals a lot of damage. The Murderglaive was kind of like nerfed before compared to a lot of other Sentinels because they dealt so much damage. They've been reworked a little bit. They're a little bit more straightforward as like defenders who will also just slam you back. That's how they end the battle quicker. I love the Senapati. The Senapati is a fascinating take on a support class because a lot of their thing is that they will allow enemies to allow other allies to attack when it's not their turn. Or move when it's not their turn, which is really cool. So they are really all about bolstering their allies, and they're not so good by themselves compared to a lot of the other disciplines. They can still fight. Sword Saints are weird. I think Sword Saint is the weirdest discipline. Initially, when you look at them, they're like AoE sharpshooter, as they're like sending slashes of fire across the battlefield to like cut through multiple enemies. But then they also have a lot of mechanics where they like teleport around, and they in 1.3 they could like taunt enemies and then teleport away, which is weird for a sharpshooter class. They're very strange. I really want to play test this version before talking more about them. But the Sword Saint has always been one of the strangest disciplines, like incredibly versatile in a situational way is how I would describe it. We're on to Bai, the last of our 5 nations. Flower Balion I play tested. This thing is crazy. Flower Balion is a necromancer themed witch with the flavor of like using flowery corpses and all that, including once you are at least Legend 1 in Flower Balion and have 2 techniques, their enlightenment is that they have a flower-choked corpse that they take around with them that scares people, and it drops their defenses. It's wild. This combined with a Death Dancer, like, shredded through enemy HP, dropping the defenses with Flower Balion, inflicting poison with Flower Balion, and having the Death Dancer aura the enemy in the air. The combat was over so quickly. Flower Balion's really cool. One of the more debuff-centric classes that also focuses a lot on, like, AoE poisons, fields, basically, like big areas of effect that inflict debuffs. Heaven Spear, I think, is one of the coolest raider classes. Tony plays it in the Anthology stream, very much based around the Final Fantasy Dragoon. Something new to this version is that the Heaven Spears, whenever they move, they do like a Final Fantasy Dragoon jump, and they slam down, dealing damage to enemies around them, and then they take the rest of their turn. They're very mobile attackers, and I'm very glad to see that Walks kept the ability for them to juggle people in the air and then slam them back down. So not only can the Death Dancer do it, but the Heaven Spear can do it, which was always the case with the Heaven Spear. Very mobile, very high damage. They had a little bit less HP than other raiders because they were so good in the previous version. I love the Mender, just like design-wise, really fun gender queer energy. And again, like that kind of whole flavor of Gubat Banwa, like when you get in touch with a lot of the feminine arts of magic and healing, even if you are someone who was born male, you might start taking on a more feminine appearance or outfit. Menders are awesome. They attack with alchemical fire. Yeah, they have a snake, you know, casual stuff. They shield people with their parasol. I really like the Mender. The Star Shooter, or Waka from Final Fantasy X, is a fun take on the ranged sharpshooter type of class, where like you can knock a ball around that hits multiple enemies, you can catch projectiles thrown at you and kick them at other people. It's a very interesting kind of like defensive in addition to offensive take on the sharpshooter. Let's see. And finally, the Warsmith, which is our... You look at this and you might think this is the Battlesmith of Gubat Banwa, that you have like a robotic companion that serves you. Not quite. When you play Warsmith, you're playing Minecraft. There's material scattered about the battlefield, and you collect it to do stuff, including boost your own attacks. Though if you're out of material, you do also speed up. Once you hit your Liberation and Enlightenment, you will be building mechs You will be like attacking with giant robot hands, um, etc. It'll be a while until you actually summon the giant robot, and by a while I mean like Legend 2, actually not that far, um, depending on how long you play Gubat Banwa for. But Warsmith is fascinating. I think one of the more complex classes. They're also a witch, which is interesting, which means they have really low HP. And they have a lot of melee attacks. Their way of defending themselves is more about like putting up walls so that the enemies can't get to them. Warsmith is wild. That's a Kamen Rider reference, right, Timmy? I haven't seen it, but I'm coming across more and more people who are fans of it. All right. So after we get to the end of the disciplines, we get to the Anting, which are the like magic items. Just for an example, the Ashra armor. Ashra are beings that have 6 arms and 3 heads, yada yada. Once you have that, once per resound, when an enemy collides with you, you can inflict violence against them. Timmy, imagine like Tony's Heaven Spear equipping the Ashra armor, and then your War Speaker slamming enemies into him, and then he knocks them into the air. Like, Anting change combat. The Blaze Mutia, when you roll a 9+ on an attack, you can set the target aflame. All your attacks instead of flame deal an extra die. These change the game. We have not gotten to magic items in the anthology streams. We've not gotten to magic items even in a lot of the solo play that I've done, because I'm kind of so focused on learning the fundamentals. But they're wild. I'm very excited to start playing around with them. All right, so most of the rest of the book is the bestiary, like the list of different enemies. The blood price is kind of like the challenge rating, and unlike D&D, it actually makes sense, which is nice. The difficulty is basically the number of Kadunganan plus 2. So let's say that you have 2 Kadunganan, your blood price will be 4, the challenge for the battle will be 4. Standard warriors of the same rank are value 1, so you could fight maybe your 2 Kadunganan can fight 4 standard warriors of roughly the same level. Etc. Enemies are not nearly as versatile as the Kadunganan. Just to go to an example, the enemy Lancer. 6 HP, 5 speed, their stats are fine, but they only have 1 inflict violence by default, which is Spear, attack a fighter within 2 squares with Bravery, which is a melee attack. And then they can also Naga Skewer, attack all enemies in an area with Bravery, blasting them wide open. You might be like, wait a second, why do they have a spear attack and then a better spear attack down here that takes 2 actions? Well, a little bit like I was talking about with solo play before, you can roll for what enemies do. In this case, if you're piloting an enemy Lancer and you don't know what they're going to do, you can roll a d8, and they're only going to Naga Skewer if you roll 7 to 8. If you roll a 1 or a 2, they're going to move, do their basic spear attack, and then move again. This is how I play Gubat Banwa solo. This is how you play Gubat Banwa solo. You roll for what enemies do. It's great. The bestiary is very long. I'm just going to say that one of the big changes to it in 1.3 is that enemies are not nearly as complicated as they were in 1.3. They don't have elemental weaknesses and resistances. They don't have a bunch of innate traits. It's much more straightforward. Combat is much faster. So you, as the Umalagad, and I'm kind of addressing this to myself, you might have to include more than 1 combat encounter per session now, because things are a little bit faster, or maybe just make your combat session significantly more complicated. Just stuff I'm thinking about when we return to the anthology streams in about 2 weeks. Every nation has its own set of enemies that if you don't want to use the generic ones. For example, I'm on Virbanwa right now. The enemy General is the Virbanwa medium, who is kind of like the enemy Senapati. They will like attack, and then another ally that's like adjacent to them can inflict violence. Let's see. Here you go. You get the idea. We can go over the enemies and favorite enemies later. Here we go. This is a really helpful segment for solo play, is descriptions of the different areas of the Sword Isles. For example, North Rusunuga is the largest island in the Sword Isles. You can see that it includes Bai right here. It's not too far from Baiku, and you can roll for what happens if, you know, this part of your campaign you're traveling through North Rusunuga. Our Manic Pixie Dream Girl from Virbanwa, who needs to kill bandits in heaven, is traveling through Rusanuga. I rolled a 4. Well, guess what? Her event on the next moon, she comes across an opium den. It is owned by a giant cat spirit who emanates laziness and intoxication. Harmless, the giant cat is close to glory. An Apumbukid warrior is conversing with the cat, seemingly trying to persuade them into something. Boom. Plenty interesting. It's all in there. And they have events like this for multiple different locations across the Sword Isles, which is great. Something else really helpful for solo play is divinations. If you're not really sure what's going to happen, you're completely stumped on what's going to happen for your next session. It's like, all of your players ended up in Gatusan somehow, and we got to figure out how their paths intersect. Well, it looks like their next session is going to be about, I rolled a 27, about change. They are going to change something about the world around them. Let's see. Let's get a little bit of vibe too. Let's roll for some type of feeling that can be interpreted rather than just such a literal verb. Sure, there's change, but there's also, is that 10? The vibe of settlement. Maybe the change is that these Kadunganan are trying to, like, grab a location somewhere. They're trying to form a warband, create a home base. All stuff that could honestly happen in the next anthology episode. You can have a descriptor if you want to find how an action needs to be done. You can have traits for your NPCs. Let's get a vibe for our Manic Pixie Dream Girl Kadungana, actually. What did I roll? 86? Now, in addition to being a Manic Pixie Dream Girl Kadungana, she's short. It's not what I was expecting. Because I was looking at the left side and I was seeing, like, vengeful, wrathful, boisterous. And I just see short. We're learning a lot about this character. All right. Location. You want to know where her next session is going to be? It's in a low mountain. Maybe she's in Apumbukid. Location problem. Again, you can roll for this. Maybe a tyrant oppresses subjects. That's always a fun one. Hunted by beasts. Another fun one. You can roll for social class of NPCs. Again, this is basically an NPC randomizer if you desire it to be. This is an NPC randomizer. This is a game randomizer. It's awesome. It's really awesome that these resources are here. That's kind of why the book is so long, because it lists all of it. Even going a step farther than divinations, you have adventure seeds. These are a few different things that could possibly, like, fuel the adventure. Now, before I get to the quirk section, I want to point out, Gubat Banwa is a very serious setting in a lot of ways. That being said, that doesn't mean there's no humor. Princess Murders the Hero is oftentimes a very funny book, especially around characters like Bangahom, the tiny yawa or demon that follows the main character around. Very fun little character wearing a giant wide-brimmed hat. There's humor in Gubat Banwa, for sure. This is a world where, like, all sorts of different species, lineages exist among each other. And the first quirk here, if you want to just, like, roll to make an NPC more interesting, if you roll a 1 or 2, has a large prow for a head. Let's look at a few other ones, a few other things that you could roll for enemies, or excuse me, for NPCs. Babbles in an indecipherable language. Walks around with 3 babies hanging from body cloth. There's also weirder ones, like doesn't have a shadow or has the spine of has a centipede for a spine. But then there's still the fun ones. Winces at a particular common word. You need a quirky NPC? Gubat Banwa has a quirky NPC generator. It's great. It's incredible. Here we go. Perhaps the most important section for those intimidated by the setting of Gubat Banwa, which on occasion is me, even though I clearly have immersed myself in it for the past 2 months. Names. 100 Gatusana names. Right here. You want to make some Apumbukid characters? Guess what? 100 Apumbukid names right here. This is where I took the names for the characters on stream. I don't know if Ami is still here. Is Ami still here? Ami didn't sound like a very indigenous Filipino name, but what do I know? But it was on the list, so I named Timmy's traveling companion Ami. Akai names, Virbanwa names, Bai names. It's all here. It's very helpful. Yeah, you found a name for a character by looking at this list. Yep, for sure. The way Wax and Dill deliberately wanted to make names like this a challenge for readers earns my respect. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Um, One of the things I love about Gubat Banwa so much, I mentioned this at the start of the stream almost, oh goodness, over 2 hours ago. Um, Gubat Banwa feels like you're cracking open like an ancient tome and to some extent deciphering it, which I think is lovely and awesome. I like that it's the things like character creation, a lot of the mechanical things have been simplified that makes it more approachable. But you are always going to be learning about Gubat Banwa, unless you're literally the person who wrote it. You're always going to be learning new things. You're going to be memorizing the honorifics. It's all stuff that you're going to be picking up on. Let's see. So this section right here feels a little bit miscellaneous, not in a bad way. But this feels a little bit like, oh, here's like some more tips for the Umalagad. Here's like some more bits about Gubat Banwa's world, which I believe was earlier in version 1.3, and I think that's kind of why version 1.3 was intimidating for a lot of people, that it hit you with so much. Here you go. Here's the Sword Devil section, which is a pre-written adventure. I'm not going to go through too deeply through it because I think I do want to play it myself. But I think Gubat Banwa is really going to benefit from pre-written adventures. This idea is basically that there is a sword devil, like some strange person going around angering Adatu. There's also Virbanwa's people hanging out here, and just kind of how these groups intersect and how you interact with these conflicts. The way it works, here's a map of the combat encounters of the Sword Devil pre-written adventure. And your Kadunganan are going to choose where to go, or if you're playing solo, maybe you roll for which place you end up in. And each one of them has an encounter for it. So that's kind of one way to create pre-written adventures, like for Gubat Banwa, adventure templates, is you can have this freedom by designing multiple zones, and we'll see what zone you end up in, basically, and it'll describe what each battle is. So, for example, in square number 3, if your party ends up there, the Ogre of the Ancestor, they have to defeat the Ogre of the Shrine. It's a 10 by 10 field. It has a waterfall in the corner. It has 5 trees and 5 boulders. They begin at the bottom of the map, single file, and they have to defeat this Ogre enemy. Sub-objective, defeat the Ogre with fire damage. If you do, gain the Hatred Agimat Anting Anting. I think Gubat Banwa was going to benefit a lot from these pre-written adventures, especially for solo play. Beautiful. So here, again, is more information about the world of Gubat Banwa. And I think that's kind of why, like, the end of the book feels miscellaneous. Not in a bad way. But the essentials are covered at the beginning. The essentials are covered at the beginning, the character creation, the lore, the flavor, and then the enemies. And then a lot of this world-building stuff that was, I believe, earlier in 1.3 is down here, which is nice. Because it allows you to get into the game a little bit faster. I don't know the moons. I don't know the months of Gubat Banwa, and I've been immersed in this system for 2 months. And it's exciting to continue learning about it, but it's kind of nice to just focus on the gameplay aspects. Before I end off stream, character sheet comes with the download. It looks kind of like this. This is a download of a PDF, so it's not the most nicely formatted. It's a PDF of a Google Sheet, but it's all here. You can copy paste your conviction, your passions, your techniques. You can adjust your stats here. I honestly track a lot of my Gubat Banwa characters just like in a few lines of a Google Doc, which is nice. It's not like D&D 5e where there's like a million skills to track and like a bunch of different spells. It's like, you can just keep the PDF open with your discipline on it, and you have your stats, you have your prowesses, and like you can go. All the roleplay stuff can be on the sheet, obviously, but you don't necessarily need all that for combat. Yeah. Do I use Lumen? I think historically I do. I don't know if I'm going to continue using it. We'll see. Editing PDFs is truly the TTRPG player's nightmare. All right, so that is a 2.5 overview of Gubot Banwa 1.4. I hope that this was a good introduction to people who want to learn the system. I hope that also this is a nice little overview of the changes from 1.3 for folks who already know the system. Yeah, I really appreciate all of you coming by. I am becoming more and more knowledgeable about this game, especially compared to the first charity stream that I ran for it on Roll-D5, and I look forward to learning more about it. I look forward to streaming it more. I look forward to just being a part of this world and this story and telling my own and like being a part of other people's with it. It truly is our new hyperfixation, for sure. I cannot stop thinking about this game. D&D 5e who? Anyway, I think I'm going to end it off there. Thank you all so much for coming through, and violence until glory.